A while back, as the wind blew through the trees and birds took to the sky, our main guy was just thinking about how he really wanted to live a totally chill and stress-free life. This guy lives for his downtime, and honestly, he's always been about that chill life, believing you should give a solid effort most of the time, but then just totally slack off for the rest because anything. After working like a beast, our hero finally landed a 16-day paid vacation and headed overseas to check out a super famous restaurant. The bus was cruising along the stone road until a huge hole forced it off track, and as the driver carefully steered around it, this guy holding a tablet started stumbling all over the place. Everyone stops in their tracks to stare at the flipped bus that just smashed through the stone road, and the guy is totally sure his short life is over, or so he thinks. After a bit, the guy who just got wrecked by a bus looked up to see the sun glowing through the clouds, and it looked totally epic. This place was totally creeping him out, and he had no clue where he was or how he even got there, especially since he literally just got crushed by a massive bus. Surrounded by nothing but clouds, a massive glowing halo appeared right in front of him with a girl standing in the center, and she's definitely the one who just asked if he was awake. The dead soul wondered who this girl could be, but she quickly cleared things up by revealing she's an observer watching over the entire galaxy. Everyone just called her the goddess, and when he asked why she was there, she confirmed he was dead, but told him he had 3 choices for what happens next. You can either head straight to heaven, come back to Earth in a brand new body, or get reborn in a totally different world. The soul was totally lost, but the goddess was in such a massive hurry that it definitely led to some serious second-guessing. The girl cracked a smile and agreed since she knew she could be pretty impatient, so the dead soul asked the goddess for some answers and got a yes, which makes sense since The soul picked the third option to see what kind of world was waiting for him, and the goddess just smirked as she started her story. Artoria is a massive world overflowing with riches, and 108 crazy labyrinths where you can team up with your crew for the ultimate treasure hunt. In this world, every kid gets baptized at age 5 to unlock insane superpowers called blessings. But things are actually pretty brutal thanks to terrifying monsters and a massive divide between the rich and poor. The soul goddess reveals that he spent his past life searching for a new hobby, but since his old world was tapped out, he told her he wanted to be reborn somewhere totally different. The goddess just smiled and accepted the soul's choice, telling her she'd grant her any insane power or ability she could ever want. But the soul actually turned down the offer because OP powers just bring drama and haters, though he still wanted a healthy body, which totally shocked the goddess. After they finished talking, the soul asked if she chats with everyone like this, but she told him straight up that she almost never does. This soul was a total exception because at just 5 years old, she saved a kitten that was actually her own descendant, and now the goddess wants to meet her face to face to say thank you. After hearing the soul goddess's story, she pointed out that everyone is totally wrong to think pity is useless. Then she laughed and told him she hoped he wouldn't believe that anymore. The goddess reached out to that glowing soul and wished for her to finally have an awesome, happy life. A little while later, the clouds finally split apart. It was a perfect day outside. Bright sunlight hit a tiny village surrounded by farm fields. The wind rustled the trees around a small stone house with the shutters closed tight, while inside, a man and woman leaned over a child's bed. This pretty girl flashed a massive smile and told the baby good morning to show him some love, while the bearded guy claiming to be the dad just called his son super cute. The kid woke up and just stared at his new parents with his jaw on the floor, giving them a super awkward and clumsy smile. Emrea loved her son's goofy smile and told Lark to hold him, and Lark proudly claimed the kid would grow up to be just as tough as his old man. His parents were totally hyped about his behavior, but he was just reeling from the fact that he'd woken up as a baby, and not being able to control his own body was seriously frustrating. Right next to a busy road deep in the woods sat a tiny house where you could hear a happy family laughing and having a blast. This dead soul just got reborn into this world with the name Owl. His new baby body is basically running on pure instinct. Whenever he gets hungry, he starts wailing no matter what His mom was Empria, a total beauty with an angelic face. Though let's be real, every mom is the prettiest to their kid. Then you've got his dad, Lark, who isn't exactly a genius, but at least he's way better than having some mean tyrant for a father. After a few days in his new body, this Zuli realizes his family are farmers, and while a huge harvest means they're set for now, most people in Arturia look down on farmers for being poor. The wildest part is that the kid only just found out, right when his mom's voice echoed through the village one evening to warn everyone it was getting dark. Emrea reached out her hands and called for light, and a tiny snow-white ball started glowing right in her palms. A soul watched as these parents celebrated their spell, lighting up the entire house. That was the most important part. Magic is actually real in this world. Right in the heart of the village, mages started appearing as men and women with pointy hats and glowing magic orbs. And let's be real. If our guy can't use magic, he glared at the burning ball of light, desperately trying to figure out how to trigger his magic before time ran out. He had to think fast because magic needs some kind of fuel to work. But he didn't care what it was called as long as he could feel it pulsing deep inside his body. Suddenly, the baby starts thinking so hard that his tiny body can't handle the power, and the whole village instantly passes out. A while later, the village had already dealt with some massive disasters. The second he tried to focus, he just passed out cold. His body was screaming for nothing but food and a nap. He focused as hard as he could to find his magic source, and he finally did it. A tiny ball of energy appeared in his gut, and even though it was small, the entire village felt it. Right then, the kid realized he could finally use this energy to cast magic. All he had to do was steer the power the right way, and he'd be set. But his seasons are flying by as winter turns to spring, and even though it's been 6 months since he was born into this world, his life is just eating, sleeping, and grinding magic. All that training finally paid off, and even though souls can't use magic, he's learned to feel it buzzing through his whole body, even if it totally wipes him out. This is the perfect time to train, so he pictures how his mom casts light magic and focuses his whole soul to chant the spell in his head. But the poor kid's body couldn't handle the pressure, and he ended up having an accident, turning bright red as his mom just smiled and stepped in to change his diaper. Obviously nothing worked out, but he knew it wouldn't be easy, so he's just gonna keep that same energy and grind it out since he's got all the time in. Morning, noon, and night, she kept trying to cast her light spell, but it was a total fail every single time. The kid had no clue why he was failing, so he ditched his mom's method and just pictured a super bright light like a massive LED lamp. That was basically the answer. He didn't need to copy his mom at all. He just had to picture how things from his old life worked. And I seriously wonder if he's the only... But none of that matters now because he can finally use magic, and the little tool just grinned and pumped his fist like a total winner. All the village needed now was some serious training. If they keep practicing, their magic power is going to skyrocket. He pictured the cooler's power coming from the baby's hands, and he's finally starting to understand how his magic works, but he's still got one huge thing to take care of first. The little guy finally drifted off to sleep, totally wiped out. He's just a baby after all, so he was out like a light. But when his mom walked in, she noticed. 5 years later, the village is way bigger, and his parents are super hyped getting everything ready for his big baptism day. He gave his parents a happy wave and headed out on his big adventure. It's finally the day where every 5-year-old gets a special blessing from God to show they're officially part Bae. In this world, your blessing is your destiny, and while some people get totally weak powers, others are strong enough to build an entire country from scratch. He figured any extra power was just a nice little bonus, so he wasn't stressed at all since this whole thing felt exactly like a gacha game from his old world. This short girl with the huge smile is Mirai, the main character's childhood best friend who lives right next door. Even though she was a year older, the whole village treated her like a little sister, and after hanging out 3 times a week, they still get huge smiles and hold hands every time they see each other. The kids stood right outside the church, talking about how the village baptism was finally happening today after he'd been waiting for it forever. Turns out Miri wasn't just there to see the kid. She actually had some huge news to drop that caught the whole village totally off guard. His best friend warned him to keep his blessing a secret, but since the whole village already knew, he just laughed it off and told her he didn't realize it was such a big deal. The boy kept the game of Dano going by asking why his blessing was a total secret, and Mir looked completely stumped because she probably didn't even know the answer herself. Totally caught off guard and blushing like crazy, she just screamed "No way" and shut the whole thing down. And honestly, the reason why is actually pretty simple. To keep kids from feeling embarrassed. It's a bright sunny day outside, but inside this small church, a baptism is going down where a soul is kneeling right in front of the priest at the altar. The blonde kid stood up and looked the priest right in the eye, and with the priest hoping he was ready, the whole village shouted for the ceremony to finally begin. The priest put his hand on the kid's head and asked for the Creator God's mercy, and suddenly his palm started glowing with a super bright light. Suddenly, a blinding light swallowed the kid's small body, and he felt this insane, mysterious power surging through every single inch of him. He was still glowing like crazy as he felt that massive power surge through his whole body, making him wonder if he'd just been given some kind of insane blessing. He shut his eyes to focus on the crazy new feelings, and suddenly, the name of his power started flashing right inside his head. Suddenly, the word moderation hit him, and he stood there totally frozen and confused. He almost asked the priest for help, but then he remembered that the blessing had to stay as so. His hero blessing was basically just a recap of his past life, making him think that maybe God actually has a grudge against him. Tears were streaming down the blonde kid's face. He knew anyone else would be stoked to have a gift like this, but to him, it just felt like his heart was breaking. He rushed home with a huge smile, dying to tell his parents that he finally got his blessing. His parents greeted him with huge smiles and immediately started cooking a massive feast to celebrate. Lark crouched down, patted his son's hat, and told him to remember that every single gift is useful in its own special way. His dad just laughed and told him to be proud of his gift no matter what. But to the rest of the village, it sounded like he was just trying to make the kid feel better. A little while later, birds fly over the treetops with massive mountains in the distance, and right in the middle of the forest, we see this short kid. He focused all his energy into his hands until a ball of magic appeared, and as soon as he shouted "Wind Bullet," the tree right in front of him got absolutely wrecked. He was totally hyped because he finally mastered wind magic, adding it to his insane collection of fire, water, space, lightning, earth, and ice powers. Looking at the smashed wood, the boy realized his magic was way stronger, and he wasn't even tired, proving all that training since he was a baby was finally paying off. He was hyped with his progress and decided to keep the grind going, switching his focus to magic so he could finally build the dream life he'd always wanted. He spent forever trying to figure out what he could compare this power to. Then, he suddenly remembered his waste bag. All he had to do was bring her into the mix. He focused his mind and called out for an object space, causing a massive rift to rip open right in front of the village with a totally empty void inside. Hyped that it actually worked, the kid pokes a stick into the gap to test it out, and it instantly vanishes the moment it touches the crack. The job was a total success, and now he's got a storage space where time works differently, so everything he puts inside stays fresh forever. After crushing my training in the village, I got home to find the table absolutely loaded with food. They had everything you could imagine. There were piles of meat and fresh buns everywhere, and the kid's jaw dropped at the massive feast, and his mom told him they were having fried meat for dinner, so he could totally stuff his face. These wellbirds are weak monsters found all over the place, but you still need 3 people to handle one, and farmers love them because their meat tastes just like chicken. A year ago, he gave his mom this recipe and asked if breading and frying it would taste better, and she totally nailed it on her first try. Sucks for Azul, but this world has 0 soy sauce and only uses salt, so since he can't eat his favorite chicken, he's just gonna invent every single seasoning himself. Our hero's house was always stocked with fresh bread and veggies his family grew themselves, so every single bite was basically made with love. These buns use special homemade yeast, and Imrea promised she'd pass down the secret family recipe to her son's bride the moment he brings her home. As soon as they started eating, the dad and son both jumped in to hype up how amazing mom's cooking was, and she just blushed a bit and joked about adding some secret ingredients. This house was always buzzing with good vibes and laughter, and today was no different. But after stuffing his face, the kid flopped onto his bed and started whining that even though if he could just use that insane magic that fixes your cells and wipes out diseases, he'd finally have the power to heal. As soon as he cast the spell, that heavy feeling in his gut totally vanished like he'd just chilled in a hot spring, and he was finally ready to crash. The village wasn't even fully asleep yet when he overheard his parents stressing out that some nasty crop disease was going to make this year a total disaster for them. Outside the door, the parents were stressing about how to survive the winter, so Anul's dad decided to hunt monsters for cash, even though it was a total death wish. Emrea looked down, totally worried, and asked her husband what they'd even do if he never came back from a hunt. The next morning, the villagers headed out to the fields and got lost in their own heads. And even though kids aren't supposed to listen to these serious talks since they can't help, our boy wasn't about to just sit there and do nothing. Thinking back to that spell from yesterday, the blonde kid tried it on some wheat sprouts, and suddenly both he and the plants started glowing. The name was honestly pretty cringe, but the village stopped overthinking it because if he actually pulled this off, they were going to make some serious bank. This girl with long hair was humming a happy tune on her way to her friend's place, but the second she spotted Mireille and shouted her name, she suddenly cut herself off and stopped dead in her tracks. She saw what her friend was doing and ducked behind the house, totally blown away and wondering if it was actually magic, and how the rest of the village even used a power like that. She watched from behind Mirai's house, feeling totally frustrated, when a weird thought hit her. Why is Aldo using magic in her family's fields? The whole village finally crashed onto the soft grass feeling like total bosses, and even though he saved Paul and his girl's family, he was completely wiped out and starving for a meal. Thinking about how last night's dinner was basically just Suel's smile, he realized a growing kid needs meat that poor farmers can't afford, so he finally stood up to take. Our hero sits up and starts begging for meat again, but this obsession is definitely going to lead to some seriously weird trouble. This weird boar beast with mushrooms growing out of its back was just chilling in the forest, totally unaware that a pair of tiny eyes was tracking its every move. These wild boars are absolute units, growing up to 2 meters long. Their meat tastes great, but the real treasure is the mushrooms growing all over their backs and heads. Everyone wants these mushrooms because This tiny newborn hunter had nothing but juicy meat on his mind, and he figured his mom would be totally down for a snack like that, even if he had to go out and kill for it. Hunting is all about having a solid game plan, because fire and lightning will torch the whole forest, and water or ice magic totally ruins the flavor of the meat, so you've got to pick your powers wisely. The choice was a total no-brainer, so he used the windmill to take out his target in a flash, leaving the guy with nothing but one long groan. He was super hyped with the results and realized wind magic was the ultimate tool for hunting, so he stepped up to his prey, sliced the mushrooms, and used a quick spell to wash away all the... He let out a huge sigh, shocked that he was staying so calm after everything that happened, and realized he'd finally just gotten used to how this crazy new world works. The kid guessed the beast weighed a solid 500 kilos, and now he was wondering how on earth he'd explain to his mom that he just took down a massive forest boar. The young hunter just smirked to himself, realizing there was no point in hiding anymore, so he decided to just tell them the truth straight up. But his good vibes got totally wrecked when his mom heard the news and hit him with the ultimate death stare. Sitting on his lap, the soul got a huge lecture about how his parents would freak out if he got hurt, especially since his mom always told him to stay far away from monsters. Emrea's anger totally vanished, and she actually praised her son for coming clean. But she warned him to never keep secrets again, and to listen when she says a place is way too dangerous. Azul was totally shocked by his mom's sudden change, so he flashed a guilty smile and begged her to forgive him. Grinning from ear to ear, Emrea booped her son's little nose and told him he totally freaked her out, so he better not do that again. Once she finished scolding him, she looked at the treasure her son brought back and said they needed to deal with it. The table was loaded with food again, but the main event was some wild boar meat that was so juicy it was literally flooding the plate. As he chows down on the food, he realizes the hype about the mushrooms was totally real. The soup is fire, and even without salt, that boar meat tastes amazing. Right in the middle of dinner, Lark finally drops the big question and asks his son when he actually learned how to use magic. He didn't expect his dad to ask that, so he just said these powers popped up the moment he got his blessing, and since Lark didn't suspect a thing, he just figured. He stopped worrying about it because he finally had a perfect cover for his magic. But he's still the only one who knows the real secret behind his power. The first question wrapped up in a flash, but my dad jumped right into the next one, asking if he actually liked magic, and why he even needed it. Check the village part again. If the village is confused, I'll include it. These questions totally confuse everyone in the village, but even though he never really thought. Lark cracked up at his son's answer and apologized for the weird questions, but then he got totally serious and told him he really needed to remember. He got dead serious and warned them that if the village only relies on power to hurt people, they're basically becoming the villains. The big guy's expression flipped instantly as he started grinning and hyping up the meal again, while the village mom joined the chat and told everyone to eat up before the food got cold. The kid didn't even care and just shoved another piece of that amazing food into his mouth. Night had fallen over the village, but our hero was stuck in his own head, worrying that he was getting way too carried away with his magic and might end up going down a dark path. He was honestly just hyped to finally have parents who actually loved him. See, in his past life, things with his mom and dad were super awkward and tense. Having a family that actually cares about you. He rolled over with a smile, thinking the goddess definitely helped him out, and he could just see her face grinning as she demanded he show her way more gratitude. It didn't take long for the parents' warnings to actually come true. A nasty disease ripped through every single field in the village, leaving the farmers with absolutely nothing to harvest. And it wasn't. Sure, the village loves their magic, but he's still a farmer at heart. And now he's got to master the field so he can finally grow his own spices. He closed his eyes with a huge smile, already dreaming about making soy sauce, miso, and his #1 goal, sugar. He was super hyped to grow some sugar, so he told his parents he needed his own field to get started. She thought about her son's request and remembered that empty garden, so when the boy hyped himself up to ask if he could use it, he gave her a massive smile the second He was super hyped when he first started, but seeing that creepy, trashed garden totally killed his vibe. Looking at all the work, the kid was pretty salty because this was a terrible spot for a 5-year-old to grow up. But he figured his mom didn't think He pulled himself together and refused to give up, realizing this was the perfect moment to use magic, so he unleashed a sharp wind cutter that sliced right through the tall grass. Then they pulled out the heavy hitters, using levitation to rip trees right out of the dirt and massive tremors to flatten the ground. After a while, he finally slumped back, gasping for air and looking totally satisfied with everything he'd just pulled off. The kid just collapsed on the floor and started whining about being exhausted, because using that much magic totally drains your energy. The way he used magic to pull that off proves he's already on a whole different level, and he's only going to get even more powerful from here. Once he was done resting, the young farmer grabbed a hoe that was literally as big as he was and jumped straight into the next stage. As they kicked off the next part of the plan, the whole village was hyped because they honestly thought digging in the dirt was the best part of the job. First, you've got to clear out all those weeds so you can finally start planting seeds. But right then, the village's happy mood gets totally interrupted. Seeds? That one tiny word totally stunned him because he completely forgot you actually need seeds to start a farm. As soon as he gets home, our future farmer runs straight to his dad to see if sugar beet seeds even exist in this world. Lark gave it to his son straight. Everyone knows these seeds, but not a single farmer in the kingdom can actually grow them, and the kid was totally shocked. Hearing his dad's answer, he was totally crushed because his plan was already falling apart before he even got a chance to start. Lark hated seeing his son so bummed out, so he told Tom that traders from another land were coming soon and might finally have those seeds. Hearing that totally sparked his hope again because merchants were the key. Even if they don't have seeds right now, the village can just ask them to go find some and bring them back on their next. His dad warned him that those merchants were way too expensive, but the kid didn't care because he wasn't just there for seeds. He wanted to hear some epic adventure stories. Lark gave his hyper son a quick pat on the head and promised he'd definitely tag along to see the merchants. Night passed, and the next morning, the lively village realized that even if he was totally broke, he could still find something else to trade for those seeds. Merchants pay big money for nuts, herbs, and boar mushrooms, but he's on a different mission today, even though the village is totally obsessed with meat. This tree deer is the top-ranking monster in the whole forest, and its antlers are worth a fortune because they're used to make rare medicine. Standing in the middle of the woods, he activates his detection magic, sending glowing lines of power shooting out from under the village and across the entire forest. This spell shoots out a massive grid of lines and circles designed to hunt down prey. It lets you sense every single living thing in the area instantly. It basically works like a magical sonar, pinging everything around. My magic isn't picking up any tree deer nearby, and just when I thought there was nothing cool around, I suddenly sensed a wild boar. He wasn't going to waste another second looking around, so he headed straight for the forest boar to take it out first before going back for the deer. The forest was buzzing with the usual sounds of birds and bugs. A light breeze shook the trees as a young hunter hid in the wild, keeping his eyes locked on his target. The village finally tracks down a boar, but the kid is just hiding behind a tree looking totally lost, wondering if he fell asleep because the beast isn't even moving. He had to see what was really going down, so he crept closer to the boar. But after just a few steps, the whole village's eyes went wide in total shock. A massive brown bear that basically never visits this forest suddenly jumped out of hiding to feast on the village's prize boar. Hidden bears might look like your average grizzly, but they actually stalk the mountains with super long bodies and are so aggressive they can wipe out an entire village without anyone even seeing them coming. Since the bear was busy stuffing his face, they finally had a shot at winning if they just stayed low and hit him when he wasn't looking. Osul suddenly jumps out from hiding with a shout, throwing his windbreaker and 2 wind blades that slice through every obstacle in their path. The bear actually spots the kid, totally shocking the other guy, and it crosses its paws to brace for the hit. The hit barely did anything, just kicking up a bit of wind around the bear. He totally blocked it. Osul started wondering just how tough this guy's skin was, and if he could even... The monster hits crazy speeds and charges through the trees straight for the kid. If he can just keep enough space between him and that bear, he might actually find a way out of this. If that bear reaches the village, he's basically toast. He definitely wasn't okay with that. He slammed his hands onto the dirt and ripped a massive stone wall right out of the ground. That wall didn't stand a chance against the bear. One single hit and cracks started spreading everywhere. The whole village was completely stunned. Even though the wall was solid concrete and clay over a foot, he had to keep his cool right now because the village totally had this, and honestly, it's way too easy to bait an angry fighter into a trap. With a crazy roar, the bear smashed through the wall, but the village instantly cast a pit spell that snatched the ground right out from under its feet. The beast's massive body slammed into the dirt with a heavy thud, and even though it was still growling, the villagers were already charging up a brand new spell. A massive waterfall crashed right into the pit where the bear just fell, and there's no way a normal person could ever survive that. The monster was just splashing around in the water and refused to die. But then a soul ended the fight by dropping a massive rockfall on it. Everything went dead silent under the pile of rocks, and there was no way that bear was escaping now. He probably already drowned in the pit, but it was better to be safe than sorry. Taking a massive breath, the guy finally realized just how much danger he was really in. He was completely out of gas and knew he wasn't ready to take on enemies this strong yet. That bear was a total beast, but it was worth a fortune, so the villagers dragged their prize out of the wreckage and scrubbed all the blood off. The kid actually made it back home in one piece, but he's still doomed to the same fate as his mom, because right behind him lies the body of a massive, deadly bear. Emrea was super worried about her son, but she knew exactly what he could handle, and both parents agreed he was lucky to even survive since only rank C adventurers could actually take that monster down. After overhearing that talk, the kid figured his magic was around the C rank level, but he honestly had no clue if that was actually impressive or just totally basic. The parents looked back at the dead monster and realized the skin was in perfect condition, meaning they were about to make some serious cash. Rich people pay a ton of money to turn this skin into trophies or super sneaky cloaks. Pretty much every part of this monster is useful for something besides food. The meat just smells way too gross. Osul jumped up super hyped and asked if the skin money was enough for sugar beet seeds, and his dad said they'd even have some cash to spare. The boy flashed a grin and told his dad he was giving the rest of the money to his parents, making the man smile and thank him. Suddenly, a strict voice totally killed the vibe, letting him know his mom was still fuming and their talk was far from over. The sun was finally setting over the village. Today's hunt was a total win, and now he finally had the cash for those seeds. He was even hoping to score something extra from the local traders. The next morning started with a massive storm. Bells were ringing like crazy all over the village, and the farmers were already out there plowing the fields. Deep in the woods near the village, a white-haired boy was already there, totally glued to some bugs crawling around. There was no mistaking it. Those things were definitely bees. As soon as he realized it, his face started making some really weird expressions. He looked like he was happy, but he also seemed... He finally tracked them down, and even though he was pretty annoyed it took so long, he finally found a beehive. And where there's a hive, there's definitely honey. Looking closer, these bees are way bigger than the ones back home, but he doesn't even care. All he can think about is that sweet honey, and he's totally losing it. He trapped the bees inside a square barrier and blasted them with a fireball, clearly trying to wipe out the danger before it could get to him. With the bees trapped inside that flaming barrier, he just had to wait for his plan to finally work. The bees just started dropping to the ground, totally lifeless, because that smoke choked them out and killed them instantly. Osul gets a closer look and realizes these bees are actually massive, so they're probably monsters and he needs to be super careful. He heard a weird noise behind him and whipped around, only to see a massive hornet hovering right in front of his face. One bee actually made it out alive. She was way bigger than the others, so is she their queen? The kid was terrified watching her every move, but for some reason, he totally... The bee hovered there for just a bit longer, but as it started losing its strength, it drifted down to the ground so smoothly that the boy's heart skipped a beat. He set up this whole scheme just to get some honey, but now he felt like a straight-up monster. Suddenly, a quiet voice begging for help echoed in his head, and his eyes shot wide open in total shock. He felt a little bad looking at the beat-up queen bee, and asked if she had something to say, since he knew a real warrior should only take on the strong, not the weak. He followed his heart and used his healing magic, and after a few shaky flutters, the bee zoomed up and circled him to say thanks. The young mage smiled at the flying insect, feeling super relieved she was finally okay since he was the one who caused her all that trouble. The boy was totally caught off guard when the bee just landed on his shoulder, clearly deciding it was hitching a ride for the rest of the trip. He looked at the bug and asked if she wanted to come along, and she started nodding her head like she totally meant it. The wolf tapped his chin and realized his mom would totally freak out if she saw a bee, but maybe he could win her over with a gift. He looks at the bee and tells her she can tag along, but only if she hooks him up with honey every now and then. She nodded her head like crazy, totally down for the plan, so the boy thanked her and officially made her his familiar, telling her he was super hyped to meet her. For some reason, these two just clicked and started trusting each other instantly. Amul looked at his new partner and tried to think of a cool name for her. But honestly, the queen bee is just... He suddenly decided to name her queen, and she was so hyped that she started waving her wings for the whole village to see. After hanging out for a bit where he met his new buddy, the kid headed back out to keep hunting. The village had never seen a beast this massive, a huge boar covered in weird crystals and nasty scars from head to toe. That thing was 100% a monster, but it definitely didn't belong in this forest, so maybe it came down from the mountains looking for a snack. Either way, It doesn't matter right now because we seriously need a plan. A wool snapped out of his thoughts when his new partner started flapping her wings, so he told her he was just busy figuring out how to catch that boar. Quinn dropped into a fighting stance, and when they asked if she'd help, she just blasted toward the front lines at insane speeds without even looking back at the village. Quinn moved so fast he completely faked him out, landing one clean hit that made him let out a total scream of pain. Queen started picking up serious speed, and every hit she landed on the boar was dead on and looked like it really stung. After landing a massive combo, the boar finally hit the dirt, and the bee hovered right over it, flexing her wings like a total boss to show off exactly what she can do. She rushed over to her friend, thanking her like crazy because what she just pulled off was seriously legendary. The kid was grinning ear to ear while hyping Quinn up, and Quinn was totally vibing with the praise, but now he had to drag this boring guy all the way home. He finally made it home and dropped his catch right at the front door, while his dad told the whole village that he'd pulled off another insane stunt. These scary monsters used to hide in the deep woods and terrorize the village, forcing them to hire adventurers, and the dad thinks this one came from the mountain, but is just super relieved his son. Emrea was already chewing her son out for being so reckless, but she suddenly went pale when she realized something else was seriously wrong. Like this massive bee sneaking up on the awkward village, looking just like an uninvited daughter-in-law showing up where she's definitely not welcome. The boy looked at his terrified mom and explained that the creature was just his familiar and wouldn't hurt anyone. Then he told her the queen was the one who actually took the monster down. They brought Trump along so the mom couldn't refuse to leave, and as soon as they mentioned the familiar's promise to make honey, Emre's face totally lit up. Turns out this whole family is obsessed with sugar, so as soon as mom heard a promise of fresh honey, she let a new person move right in, which was honestly super weird. The welcome was super weird, but Azul was just hyped his new friend didn't get caught, and Quinn was totally down with how things turned out. It was no big deal. We just had to build a house for the new guy, so Mirai and I grabbed our gear and headed back to the forest where we always work. He measured the honeycombs and set them on the table with a thud, staying totally locked in while two curious people watched his every move. A girl's voice suddenly piped up, asking what he was making, and he told her it was a beehive for bees to create that sticky honey in the pot. Mari dipped her finger in for a taste and immediately started grinning as that sugary sweetness hit her tongue. Queen was the ultimate queen bee who could control every species out there. So she had tons of hives making honey and guarding everyone from monsters, and mixing all those different honeys together just made them taste way better. He set the hives down and looked super proud, already hyped about all the awesome stuff he could make with that sweet queen honey. So the guy decided to cook up that raw ham using the queen's honey, and with his friends cheering him on, he got right to work. There are tons of different hams out there, but they went with pancetta, and even though Azul explained everything, his two friends were totally clueless about what it even was. Pancetta is just the Italian word for pork belly, and it's basically raw salted bacon. First, you cook the meat, slice the brisket into strips to marinate for a week, and then let it dry out for a solid 2 or 3 months. To make the best brisket ever, you need this marinade called samri, which is a mix of water, salt, honey, onion, and garlic. Throw everything into a pot. Let it boil. Mireille was super annoyed that she couldn't try the new food today, so Wool gave a guilty smile and promised to cook her a massive feast for the winter. Once the brisket finished soaking in the pan, they tossed it into a barrier under a cooler to dry it out, and then O'Neill and Mirai finally said their goodbyes. He plopped down on the ground with a huge smile, knowing he'd have endless honey and a New Year's brisket feast all because of Queen. Life in the village is super chill and easygoing right now, but the big sugar beet harvest is coming up fast. Once those beetroots are picked, he's finally gonna have both honey and sugar ready to go. Now making actual sweets doesn't feel like some impossible dream anymore. The sugar beet harvest is finally here, and Awul is super hyped in the kitchen as he and Quinn get ready to start making some sugar. First, you gotta peel that thick skin off the beetroot, chop it into tiny 1 centimeter cubes, and then toss them right into some 70-degree water. Next, you gotta wrap the pan in a thick cloth and let it sit for an hour. Then just pull out the pieces and put the juice back on the fire to keep cooking. You gotta boil that juice for a whole hour while scooping off the foam, and once it gets thick like syrup, just lower the heat and keep it going. Once it turns white, kill the heat and keep stirring that sticky goop until it finally hardens up. After everything they pulled off, the final result is served up and the stage is totally set. It wasn't exactly what the village hoped for, but you can't get it right the first time. The boy took a taste and knew it was definitely sugar, even if it was still full of junk and barely sweet. The young chef wondered if magic could purify sugar, so he started scrolling through his mind to picture exactly how it would work. I thought about it for a second and a washing machine popped into my head, so I used my water magic and focused on that crazy spinning motion. The sugar pieces sitting on the plate get sucked right into the middle of that swirling water vortex. The vortex keeps spinning, and you can literally see all the junk vanishing as it sucks the moisture out of the sugar, leaving 2 clean piles behind. The sugar turned out totally perfect, looking just like a snowy mountain and tasting exactly how it was supposed to. The sugar beet harvest was massive, and with everyone working non-stop to make sugar, time just flew by before they knew it. Tucked away in his secret spot, a huge pile of clay pots was stacking up in the empty space right outside his weird workshop. Every jar was packed with sugar, and as the village kept working, the taste just got better and better, giving him enough to last all the way until next year. Once winter wraps up, he's planting all those leftover seeds to pull off 2 or 3 more massive harvests. With sugar and honey finally in the village, they had everything they needed to make sweets, and he was grinning like crazy because he was one step closer to his big dream. The young chef figured it was time to get cooking and jumped right into it. He decided to start off with something super simple. He kneaded the dough and cranked up the oven. After a bit, the Knoll kid rushed to his parents with a mystery meal, super hyped to show them what he cooked up just to make them happy. His parents were so moved by his words that they pulled him into a massive hug, knowing their son was truly the best kid ever. His parents were super hyped to try the round snacks he made, and the moment they bit in, there was a massive crunch. His parents were totally blown away and looked at him with glowing eyes, but his mom was acting super weird and seemed confused when she called him boy. She looked happy, but her face was actually super creepy, and when someone asked what was up, she just blurted out that it was a cookie. Emrea flashed a big smile and asked if this was everything he'd made, and her son told her he was actually planning to sell some to Mr. Lebrand. The woman let out a terrified scream, warning them that if they didn't stop, a massive, brutal fight was about to go down. Mom just kept shamelessly stuffing her face with raw dough and told her son she'd handle the rest of the cookies, leaving Asu feeling pretty annoyed. Emrea was dying to know where her son got that recipe, but he just gave a nervous grin and lied, saying it was all part of his special blessing from the goddess. The cookie basket was empty in a heartbeat, and their dreams of selling them vanished just as fast. Aul baked 50 cookies and his mom literally crushed every single one, proving he totally underestimated how much women love sweets, and even though she's happy now, that memory still feels a little sketchy. The merchants finally showed up at the village again. The kid decided to show Lebrant exactly what he made using those sugar beets and the stuff he bought last time. This is definitely going to. Lebrant stared at the pure white sugar in his hand, totally shocked because he'd never seen anything like it, and he finally figured out the secret behind the honey. Even though Essul didn't. Lebrant immediately switched into dealer mode to see what his new partner was packing, and the guy didn't hesitate to tell him he had 20 cans of sugar and 10 barrels of honey. The merchant flashed a professional grin and happily agreed to buy every single thing the kid was selling, which was a total shock that nobody saw coming. Lebrant laid out his prices, offering 5 gold for the sugar and 4 for the honey, plus he'd toss in 5 extra silver just because the sugar was top tier. Andal was blown away by the price, and immediately started dreaming of being filthy rich, doing the math to see how much that gold would be worth in his old world's cash. The kid suddenly snaps out of it, glares at the merchant, and asks if he's messing with him, which totally catches the guy off guard. He just gave an awkward shrug and a smile, making Lebrant realize this kid was way too smart to be fooled, so he immediately jacked up the prices for honey and sugar. The villagers were hyped with the results and realized they finally had a way to play the merchant, even though Lebrand had actually been a total bro since he arrived, so they figured he should just be thankful to get such a crazy good product. The kid thanked him for the solid deal and handed over a small basket as a little bonus for working together. The merchant spotted something strange and demanded to know what it was, so the village just told him they were sugar cookies he'd whipped up, and the moment he took a bite, there was a massive crunch. The merchant was totally shocked by how sweet it tasted, so he asked the kid if he baked it himself, and the boy said yeah. The village was totally thrown off by how weak the reaction was, and he definitely wasn't ready for things to get this weird. Brand was a total pro at business, telling his new partner he'd drop a whole gold coin for every basket of cookies they still had left. The price totally stunned the kid, and even though he knew honey and sugar were expensive, charging that much for a single cookie was just straight up awkward. He gives a nervous smile as a ghoul says he's down to his last basket, and a buyer jumps in to grab it but asks for a quick second to count everything up. To save the merchant from doing any boring math, the kid just blurted out the total price, but he'd already counted his profit so many times he knew the exact number by. Brant's smile was so forced that the young merchant immediately knew something was up. The man hands the kid a heavy bag of gold and asks him straight up if he wants to work for him when he grows up. The kid was totally shocked and shut the offer down fast, telling them a broke farmer like him couldn't even dream of something that crazy. The man in the hat watched the village fade into the distance, knowing there was no way a broke farmer could ever make 230 gold in a single deal. He was dead certain that this kid was in for a seriously rough time ahead. Then, disaster struck when Mir got hit with a massive fever and was stuck in bed, while a mysterious tool sat on a chair right next to her. Even though she was burning up with a fever, she kept apologizing for making him stay there. But he didn't mind at all since her parents were out working in the fields and there was... He looked at his once energetic girlfriend with pity, telling her to just rest and stay hydrated, and she silently agreed as the hours ticked by and the sun moved across the sky. Ray was totally wiped out from the fever and passed out, which was exactly what the village was waiting for, so I stood up and looked around to see that the coast was finally clear. He reached out, touched her face, and fired up his healing magic. A soft glow wrapped around her whole body. Her breathing finally went back to normal, and she drifted into a peaceful... Once she's healed, her fever will be gone by morning, and Mireille will finally be back to her usual happy self. So he tucks her in, and hopes she feels better soon. Now kids all over the village are starting to get sick. They've all got the same symptoms, like high fevers and feeling totally drained. It's probably because things aren't very clean. To fix this without using magic, you're gonna need soap, but the stuff in this world is super expensive and honestly sucks because it's just stinky, useless fat. The next morning, the village started their huge mission to make soap, and Quinn was right there following him like always. He wanted to make the soap smell way better by adding flowers. But since he had no clue what grew in this world, he looked for an expert and locked eyes with the queen, Jack. He's actually got a pro to teach him about the flowers, and she's a queen who knows them way better than any human ever could. Thanks to his familiar, he finds a stunning tree with snow-white petals and realizes instantly that they're camellia flowers. He didn't waste a second and started scooping up all the seeds scattered on the ground. He figured he could plant a few of these chameleon trees back at his place. The bees would totally. After finally filling up a whole bag with the samples, Stool wiped the sweat off his face and grinned, totally hyped that all his hard work actually paid off. It takes a solid 2 to 3 kilos of seeds just to get 1 liter of camellia oil, so he's got to stock up big time if he wants to grow that camellia trees. Making chameleon oil is actually super easy. You just spread the seeds out in the sun to dry and leave them there all day. We steam the seeds for 15 minutes. This gets all the moisture out and makes the rest of the job a total breeze. Then, we use a little magic to peel those seeds right out of their shells. To get that oil, they use a press by bashing a wedge with a hammer to squeeze the seeds until the liquid leaks out. And then they just filter it to clear out all the leftover bits. Now the clear oil is finally ready. And man, this chameleon oil feels super smooth and smells absolutely amazing. Next, he adds potassium hydroxide to the oil, which he gets by simply mixing calcium hydroxide and potassium carbonate together. First, you gotta grab some weeds from the garden and torch them. Take those ashes and mix them right into some water. Some of the junk will float to the top, but the good. They take the quicklime the village bought from Lebrant and toss it in water to get calcium hydroxide. Then they mix everything together to make potassium hydroxide. Add some camellia oil and boom, they've finally got a soap base. Even as a raw base, this soap smells absolutely insane, and now all they have to do is pour it into a wooden mold to finish it off. After making a bunch of cool-shaped soaps, Sol hopped in the tub to test them out, and since they smelled amazing and bubbled up perfectly, he knew he could totally sell these. Emrea is taking a bath with her son when she notices some soap they didn't even buy. But the kid just chills in the water and tells her he actually made it himself with a little oil. The whole family finally got to test out this new soap made with chameleon oil. By the next morning, the results were already showing, and Emery was totally obsessed with how it worked. It smelled amazing, and it's like this family is totally used to the grief by now, with Emrea looking weirdly energized and Lark completely drained, while Azul just stands there without a clue. Or maybe It's finally time to meet Murray, and since she's been sick lately, the first thing everyone asks is if she's feeling any better. Asasir flashed a big smile at her friend, telling him she was feeling way better, and that she really couldn't have made it without the village. Especially his care. He was super hyped to see his girl feeling better, so he told her he brought a little surprise. He pulled out some wood deer meat snacks and a whole basket of cookies. She was super grateful. The gifts from Mina Ray didn't stop there, and next, the boy handed his girlfriend some soap shaped just like a flower. She couldn't get over how pretty it looked and smelled, while she was totally touched that he made the soap just for her, and hearing that he just wanted her to stay healthy made the kids blush like crazy. Mapere is so touched by how much he cares that she gives him a quick peck on the cheek, and now they're both blushing like crazy. Life stayed totally chill for our farmer as the months flew by and winter finally made its big comeback. Azul tossed a few more logs into the fire and complained about the freezing air. but he was stuck with it since winter had totally snuck up on them. Even with winter starting and the village usually being super noisy with traders, Ossel headed to the square alone to calmly meet Lebrant himself. The merchant greeted her supplier and they jumped straight into business, where he apologized for only wanting these specific goods because the rich nobles in the capital are totally hooked on them. Lebrant warns his friend that everyone is hunting for his source, and while he's keeping it a secret for now, he'll have to spill everything if the ruling family comes knocking. He apologized again since a warning was all he could give, flashing an awkward smile that the other guy matched right back. Everyone thought merchants were just selfish, but as Lebrant handed over the bag of cash, he looked totally wiped out, proving things were way worse than he let on. To stop causing drama, he told the merchant he was done bringing goods for the winter, since there's nothing cool to sell anyway, but he'd be back in the spring with some way better. He told his friend to go get some rest, and Lebrant just laughed, saying he still couldn't believe he was doing business with a kid before they both headed out. Even after the sun went down, things in the village house didn't slow down for a second. This kid had a million ideas he wanted to pull off before spring arrived. But the very first thing, he can only recreate about 60% of the stuff we have today, and he's far from a master chef, but he's just gonna keep trying and failing until he finally gets it right. Since the village was prepping a massive feast, the main course just had to be chicken teriyaki and miso soup. But they needed meat first, so everyone bundled up in their winter gear to go hunt. Meet the snowbird, a monster that's 50 centimeters long with a massive 1-meter wingspan and feathers as white as pure snow. The whole village was crazy for meat, and he couldn't stop grinning at the thought of sharing a massive feast with Mirai, even in the dead of winter when all the animals were usually hiding away. Huge snowflakes are piling up, and the boy is stuck wondering why he hasn't run into a single monster this whole time. Is it just because it's winter? Well, at least. Suddenly, the detection spell pings that someone's nearby, and a stool hiding behind a tree peeks out to see what's going on. He was totally blown away by the gorgeous snow-white bird standing right in front of him. One look at it and he totally forgot his mission, wondering if this was even the same snowbird, since the one staring him down was way bigger than anyone told him it would be. Suddenly, a voice echoes in his head, telling him they already know he's there, and there's no point in hiding anymore. Was he just seeing things, or was this bird actually talking to him? Who even is she? This whole vibe felt super familiar to me, but the rest of the village didn't. This village sat right next to a massive bird, where a guy named Tool looked up with a huge grin to introduce himself while everyone bundled up against the freezing winter snow falling from the sky. The bird looked down at the village and started to smile. She told him that the boy she met there was super interesting and really polite. She'd never met anyone like him before in her life. The birds spread their wings and shook their tufted heads as a massive aura flared up around them, making a nearby soul realize he was totally outclassed by their power. Atul started panicking, thinking one wrong move meant the bird would end him in a heartbeat. But she just smiled and said she felt the village's stress and he was totally fine. A strange Tool and a bird were just standing there in the deep snow between the thick trees. The villagers all figured the bird's name was probably Snowy, but the bird looked right at them and told. Village's face turned red as he gave a shaky smile, claiming the bird was probably just a legend. But then she looked him right in the eye and told him he was spot on. She really... Sweat is pouring down the Ahul's face as he forces a nervous smile, thinking he's lucky he didn't try to fight that bird. And then he tells the bird he raised his hand, stepped back with a smirk, and said he was done messing with the bird, so the bird just closed its eyes. He starts to walk away but freezes in his tracks, getting totally freaked out when the bird turns and tells him to stay put while the snow keeps piling up on the trees. Aesel's sweating bullets as he begs the bird to let him help. But the bird just stares at the village, sensing a crazy power in him that's way too strong for his. The bird spread its wings again and announced it was actually curious about the village, so it was going to keep a close eye on them from now on, leaving Tool standing there with a bright red face. A mouth suddenly pops up on the village's face as he starts panicking and yelling for the bird to explain itself. But the bird just gives him a shady look and asks if he's got a problem, making the village sweat like crazy. This guy bowed his head and told the bird it could do whatever it wanted. Honestly, there was nothing special about him at all. The bird looked up and snapped back that it would make its own choices. The bird spreads its wings and says it needs to shrink down to stay low-key, asking the village for a cute nickname while some idiot just stands there grinning, thinking the bird is totally hyped. This guy gives a nervous grin and tells the bird its name is Haku, and after staring at the village in dead silence, the bird bursts out laughing and says they actually picked a solid name. The bird shrank down a bunch of times and landed right on Village's shoulder, telling him to call him Haku from now on, while a soul nearby just watched feeling totally embarrassed. The villagers said they were heading back, and the bird just smirked, saying she was hyped to see what the human kids were up to. Atul headed out with the bird on his shoulder, telling Haku that even though he's having a blast, he's gotta keep his mouth shut and act like a regular bird around. Alu and Haku were just chilling at home when the village sent word that he was finally back. Suddenly, this massive, creepy bee flew right up to Hakak and started staring. The bee flew into the village and started blabbing about who he brought along, but the Kuel totally panicked, waving his hands and shouting that the bee got it all wrong. Haku finally walks up to the bee and they start a massive stare down. The bee is straight up glaring at Haku. One of the souls catches them in the act and is totally... The bee just floated there right in front of Haku's face, and as they shared a long silent stare, a nearby soul nervously wondered if they were actually talking to each other. The bee finally buzzed away, so Haku shut his eyes and started shaking his hair tuft all over the place with a bright red face, staying totally locked into everything happening around him. Haku looked at Bee and told his tool that he'd finally explained everything, and with the two of them actually becoming friends, the whole village started celebrating while a fire blazed in the... Haku looked over at the village and joked that the bee was totally obsessed with the place. Then he got caught off guard when it flew right up to him, calling it super cute while he stood near. The snow just kept falling while the whole village started linking everything to Haku. But eventually the sun came out and left the trees covered in white. Just down the road from the fields, merchants were selling clothes right out of their carts, and the locals were totally hyped to see what they could buy. Afal and Mir walked up together and stopped right in front of Lebrant, grinning ear to ear as they said hello. Lebrant smiled back, telling them it felt like forever since they... Lebrant and the boys were just talking about how the market is finally getting busy again after a dead winter, when Mireille jumps in to show off a ton of food and brags about... This guy realized he had nothing to eat, but then a fancy glass bottle suddenly popped out of nowhere, filled with a mysterious liquid that was glowing with a crazy magical light. LeBron and Mir were super hyped as they started checking out that bottle of liquid. Mir was totally obsessed, wondering how a bottle could even look this cool. LeBron pointed out that it was actually... Adul popped the bottle open and dripped some liquid onto his hand, leaving Lebrant and Mary totally stunned as he explained he was just trying to make a healing potion and ended up with this stuff by total accident. A.O. looked at Mireille and told her she just needed to hang in there for a second. Then, he poured that liquid onto his hands and pressed them right against her face, Mireille. As the liquid sinks into Mireille's skin, she just stares ahead in total shock until her whole face starts to glow. Alul explains that this stuff is actually a special skin lotion. It's made to keep your skin super soft and give it a perfect, healthy glow. Lebrant picks up the bottle and admits. The guy flashed a nervous grin and challenged Lebrant to guess the price of the lotion, so Lebrant stopped to think while they decided the village would sell exactly 100 bottles and... Lebrant throws his arms wide and agrees to the deal since the village knows the stakes, and as a soul smiles back at him, you can see a freshly plowed field right in the background. The crew stood by the shops waving goodbye to Lebrant, while one guy clutched a bag of cash, hyped that he made 10 gold coins per bottle and could keep the money flowing. The group finds themselves in the woods where Mireille points ahead and says they need to keep studying, but Anul just smiles and tells them they should start picking potatoes instead. The crew ended up in a potato field right in the middle of a massive forest. Miri grabbed some sticks and started swinging them around like crazy. Aul was just picking veggies, feeling totally safe. 2 months later, the village is getting way too loud as everyone crowds the streets to gossip about why so many rich nobles are rolling into town, while one guy in the pack looks absolutely terrified. Lebrant stood right at the village entrance with sweat pouring down his face. He slowly lifted his hand and forced out a super nervous smile. A bunch of fancy aristocrats were just standing. Sweat poured down his face as he realized Lebrant totally caved to the nobles and led them straight to him for those lotions, so now he's gotta bail fast before anyone starts getting suspicious. Lebrant threw his arms wide with a massive grin, apologizing for the delay but promising he brought tons of awesome gear to sell, and the crowd was totally locked in. The locals started whispering that Lebrant was just ignoring the whole mess, and they were totally stuck wondering what to do next. Lebrant was sweating bullets and looking totally stressed as he told them some rich guy wanted to find his supplier, but he warned them that this person is a total mystery and they'll never actually find him. Atul realized Lebrant was covering for him, so he decided to act like a clueless kid to stay out of trouble, raising his hand with a grin and lying that his mom just sent. Lebrant looked at the village with a nervous grin, saying it's been way too long and thanking them for buying his stuff, while Sol just gave him a shaky smile back. The second it gets quiet, a girl steps out of the carriage and starts calling for Lebrant, making him and the tool totally lose their cool. The girl steps out of the carriage and says she knows exactly who the kid is, which totally freaks out Lebrant, who quickly lies that Asul is just a normal village boy. But Asul is hyped because he's sure that's actually Mrs. Moore. Atul pictured this epic castle with massive towers reaching for the sky. He realized Mrs. Moore is actually married to the Count who rules this whole area. She's super smart and a total pro. This tool showed her some bottles, thinking she was just a trend-obsessed girl looking for lotion. But then she leaned in and started asking him about soybeans. Tool grabbed the bag with a big smile, saying his mom was going to make some seasoning from those soybeans, right where the forest and farm fields sat behind the village. Sweat starts pouring down his face as he realizes he just blurted that out without even thinking. Lebrant stood right next to the lady, sweating bullets with a shaky grin as he told her that pasta is actually made from these beans. Mrs. Moore's face went totally dark as she shot Lebrant a scary look, telling him to back off and let her finish talking to the kid. Lebrant rolled up to the village sweating buckets, apologizing for the mix-up while totally cringing because the spirit next to him was scaring the life out of him. One of the guys held up a bag of beans and confirmed Mr. Lebrant wasn't lying about the village using them for pasta. And while Moore was suspicious of Atua at first, he realized he wasn't just seeing things, and Mrs. Moore really was using magic to catch him in a lie, while she closed her eyes and admitted she'd never seen soybeans used. Miss Moore leaned in with a smile and thanked him for his time, but Atul just stared at her in total shock as the whole vibe suddenly got super intense. Suddenly, the girl spins around and heads toward the carriages and the crowd, with her crew following right behind the wagons. Lebrant clutched his chest as sweat poured down his face, staring off into the distance and letting out a calm breath, while a spirit watched him walk away. Mrs. Moore gave the guys a shady look while she thought it over, and Lebrant finally let out a breath, clutching his chest with a nervous smile as Aswell grinned back at him. She stared at his red, grinning face and realized this was definitely not your average kid. Atul noticed Mrs. Moore staring and just looked back at her, totally confused. The girl looked down, realizing he was hiding a crazy amount of magic inside his body. This was the exact secret lay. She knew the village couldn't stay hidden forever, especially since a regular farm kid with that much insane magic looks totally suspicious. His face turned bright red as he started laughing, thinking he'd finally caught a lucky break. Starting tomorrow, he could go right back to his chill, easygoing life as a farmer. Morning rolls around. This guy is just wandering through the forest. He stops dead in his tracks and glances over. He can totally tell someone is creeping on him from the bushes. No one in the village could see the face of the guy watching him, but while he was working in the garden, he realized Mrs. Moore must have sent this stalker because she's dead serious. Atul pictured B and Aku hiding in the bushes, and since Aku was sure he couldn't use magic, Atul told them both to stay out of sight for a while. He grabbed the water with a huge smile, deciding it was time to live like a normal farmer and stop using so much magic so he could finally enjoy the simple life. 2 weeks fly by, and just a short walk from his house, a guy is hacking away at firewood with a massive axe, stopping to wipe the sweat off his face because he's totally exhausted. Atul narrowed his eyes, thinking he finally lost his tail after a few days. But he wasn't taking any chances as he ducked into the deep woods and held out his hands to cast a flickering line started glowing all around the village, and as he closed his eyes, he realized that even though 2 weeks felt like a long time to him, Mrs. Moore clearly didn't have the patience to wait. Haku and Abi suddenly pop up behind the village and start yelling his name, making the girl blush and scream in total shock. He threw his hands up and started yelling that he told Haku and B to stay hidden, but Haku snapped back that the plan didn't matter anymore because everything was totally falling apart. Atul stared at Haku in total shock, but Haku just turned his back and told him to use his spatial vision to get on Azare as fast as possible. Asule stared up at the mountain, spread his arms wide, and started casting a massive spell. Back then, the people of Onan village thought these peaks were just sitting on their outskirts. But Atul was totally terrified, but Haku just said the village finally caught on as the radar filled up with over 100 monster signals. The village was crawling with all kinds of angry monsters carrying weapons. They were literally everywhere, swarming the ground and filling up the sky. Atul realized every single one of them was charging right for the village. The guy looked totally petrified as he told Haku they were in huge trouble, and Haku agreed, warning him that it wasn't just the village in serious danger. As a bee buzzed through the air, Haku looked at the village and declared that he and the bee would be the ones to protect the ancient people, while the villagers just had to focus on. Atul was totally lost on how to stop the monster swarm, and while Haku insisted the village would survive, he couldn't help but worry they'd all be wiped off the face of the earth. Atul balled his fist to stop shaking, and Haku could tell the village was finally ready to fight. But they were running out of time and had to give it everything they had. Atul rushed out of the trees and swore he'd do his absolute best, so Haku and the bee flew off in the other direction, as Haku told him they wouldn't even say goodbye. Tool made it back to his place, and as he sprinted off, he figured Haku and B could handle saving the other villages. But he had a totally different mission to take care of. A stool slams the door open with all his strength and charges inside, screaming at the top of his lungs for his parents. His parents were just standing there at the village entrance. They were actually pretty spooked because their son just showed up out of nowhere. Suddenly, everyone started screaming that a huge pack of monsters. Sweat started pouring down the parents' faces as they looked at their son in pure terror, realizing the village definitely wasn't playing games. Everyone kept screaming that this was no joke. They had to get every single person out of there right now. The dad stared at the village, looking absolutely terrified. The village chief looked super worried and said they were in big trouble, but Sol cut him off and shouted that he'd handle the village while his parents escaped. He walked away from his parents, said a quick sorry, and then suddenly bolted from home while the terrified villagers started screaming his name at the top of their lungs. He bolted from home with his eyes squeezed shut, praying his parents would forgive him even though he knew they'd be livid, because he just didn't have any other choice. Eventually, he spotted the village sitting right on top of a hill. He stared at the place with a super serious look on his face. He pictured the flames and knew that while the parents saved everyone, he raised his hands high, and suddenly the sky just blew up while magic kept pouring out of the villagers' palms. The tool stopped working, and he whipped around, knowing Mrs. Moore's lackey in the village would definitely notice that massive explosion. Tool looked over at the mountains and saw a massive army of monsters charging right at him, kicking up a huge cloud of dust as they sprinted across the ground. He took a closer look and saw a massive swarm of monsters charging right at him, baring their teeth and waving weapons. Tool stared at all those pissed-off faces and realized he was right about the massive numbers. But these identical crazed monsters were actually charging down the mountain like they were running for their lives from something even scarier. He remembered the monsters from earlier and realized they were all coming down the mountain for the same reason. So he threw his arms out and shouted that he had no choice but to use his magic to save the village. Iroh plants his feet and raises his hand to start casting a crazy spell. A huge tornado blasts out of his palm and shoots straight into the air. Then, out of nowhere, Christmas trees. The villagers threw their hands up and summoned a massive razor-sharp tornado that started shredding every monster heading their way. The magic tool kept firing off massive gusts of wind that ripped into the monsters, sending their armor and body parts crashing to the ground. Tool is dripping with sweat and gasping for air, looking toward the village where his loyal monsters are lying on the ground with their limbs completely ripped off. One line out. If the input is 3 sentences, should I provide 3 sentences? Rewrite the following line. Singular. The input is 1. Sweat was. The village was surrounded by dead monsters, but as our hero gets into a fighting stance, he sees a massive cloud of dust as another huge wave of beasts charges over the hill. Ajulo was dripping sweat with huge bags under his eyes from exhaustion, and as he stared down the endless swarm of monsters, he realized he was totally cooked if they kept coming. Ossel tensed up, threw his hand into the air, and started charging up. A bright light began to glow right in his palm. He screamed that he was done complaining and was finally unleashing his ultimate move. He kept his hand raised and unleashed a spell called Thunderclap, sending massive bolts of lightning crashing down to fry every monster on the ground. The second the spell stops, the ground is covered in nothing but crispy, burnt monsters, and the survivors could only stare at their fallen family members in pure terror. The village sat on a tiny patch of land that wasn't covered in monster corpses yet, but a massive new horde was already charging straight for them. Sweat poured down his face as he unleashed another magical thunderclap, and a split second later, a massive wave of lightning fried the entire monster army. Right outside the village, the fields were covered in crispy, burnt monster corpses, but more of those creepy freaks were already marching in from the distance, and some were even carrying weapons. Sweat was dripping down his face and his hair was a total wreck. He looked over at the dead monsters and told himself he did a solid job. But right then, a whole new. The village was totally crushed next to a giant rock, and Oswald collapsed onto the dirt, hanging his head because he was completely out of juice. Suddenly, he looked absolutely terrified when a massive roar from some beast ripped through the air. He was still face down in the dirt, but when he looked up, a massive dinosaur was standing right over him. The beast let out a terrifying roar while scanning the area, and to make things, Tool was shaking with fear as he realized this monster was actually an imperial dinosaur, a high-ranked beast that was supposed to be extinct and could easily level an entire village. The beast flashed its sharp teeth and let out a massive roar. Suddenly, it turned its terrifying stare right toward the village. He could only watch in total shock, his jaw dropping as his eyes went. The shield popped up instantly, but the monster just smashed right through it, sending the tool flying and knocking the village leader's hat clean off. The monster whipped its tail and sent a soul flying through the air, blood spraying from its mouth as it crashed into the dirt and screamed in pure pain. Huge clouds of dust were swirling all over the village. He slowly pushed himself off the ground, groaning in total pain. He looked up and started wiping the blood right off his face. This guy stared up at the massive beast standing right in front of him. He knew he was in big trouble because his energy was almost completely gone. He wasn't even sure if his magic... Suddenly, Paul charges toward the village with his massive dinosaur claws, totally set on trashing the place all over again, while a terrified villager spots him coming and completely freezes in fear. The dinosaurs attacked in a total blur, and as he stared at those sharp claws, he realized he was way too slow to dodge. His tool clatters to the ground, but he's totally safe because Haku jumped right between him and the dinosaur to block the hit, leaving both the monster and the guy completely stunned. Suddenly, a bee pops up right in front of the royal dinosaur's face and starts blasting it with flashes of light, making the owl look up in total shock. Haku and the bees were totally locked in, hovering there and staring them down until a soul started screaming their names. The guy looks at Haku with a huge grin and says they're right on time, but Haku just apologizes to the village for being late. Haku and the bee took to the skies, telling the tool they'd handle the monsters while it focused on taking down the dinosaur. Suddenly, Haku and bee charge straight at the monsters and start hitting them from every angle while the beasts desperately try to fight back. With a big grin, this guy said he knew the legendary Luftbird, and the bee queen would totally handle those monsters. Tool looked right at the dinosaur and started screaming that he was the one it should fight, telling the beast to bring it on, but the monster just glared at the village and bared its teeth. The monster didn't even hesitate before charging straight at the village with a massive roar, kicking up rocks with every step of its dinosaur paws. Atul dropped into a fighting stance and braced for the monster's next move, remembering how the beast had actually caught him slipping once before. The monster lunges at the village, but he dodges just in time and realizes that if he really focuses, the beast is actually moving way slower than it looks. Atul shut his eyes to focus his magic, making his hair grow as bubbles swirled around him. Then he thrust his hands forward and blasted the monster with a water machine gun. Water started splashing all over the beast's body. The monster was totally submerged in the water. It turned toward the village and let out a massive roar. The beast swung its tail, but Asul stayed floating in the sky, dodging every one of the dinosaur's strikes while blasting back with water, realizing that his salt attacks were actually way more useful than he thought. This beast is just standing there with its back to the village. It keeps swinging its tail around non-stop. The entire village is actually floating in the air to dodge its hits. The village is floating in midair right in front of a massive dinosaur tail. Astul shuts his eyes, holds out his hands, and starts spamming water attacks over and over. Then, the village kept popping up all around the dinosaur, blasting it non-stop with a high-speed water machine gun. The dinosaur tried swinging its massive tail to crush the village, but it couldn't. The living weapon cracks a smile, realizing he's actually having a blast. He never thought going toe-to-toe with someone this strong would be so much fun. Water soaks the monster. The monster glared down at Soul, who was just standing there mocking him. But Soul just smirked as he realized he was actually using water moves against a high-rank beast. With a tool floating in the air, he held out his hands and started blasting ice bullets right at the dinosaur. The dinosaur threw its head back and let out a massive roar as ice started crawling all over its body, freezing the water on its skin until the beast finally crashed to the ground in a huge cloud of... He pictured those dinosaur shadows and smirked, knowing that once the cold hits, reptiles are totally paralyzed. And this monster was definitely not ready to be frozen in its tracks. Pool shuts his eyes and holds out his hands to start casting. A glowing circle starts flickering right between his palms. He pictures Vector and focuses on using lightning magic with an iron coin to guide the blast. The whole village looks totally different and ready for war, so Asul holds out his hands as magic charges up, and he declares that the monster is finally going down. He thrusts his hands forward and fires a massive electromagnetic blast straight into the dinosaur, frying the beast with lightning until its mouth hangs open and its tongue flops out. He held his hands out as the blinding light from his magic finally started to fade. That village attack was so strong it literally punched a massive hole right through the monster's city. Sparks of electricity. The monster snapped its head up and started screaming like crazy while blood and smoke leaked right out of its head wound. The monster starts wobbling and finally slams into the ground, sending a huge cloud of dust flying everywhere. Atul crept up to the monster's face, wiping sweat from his forehead with his hand, and he totally froze when he saw a massive hole right in the beast's head. Asul collapsed and sprawled out on the ground, gasping for air with his eyes shut as he admitted that monster almost drained every bit of strength he had left. Haku and Abi finally show up at the village entrance, and the guys start hyping up a soul for his crazy performance in the battle since they already knew Haku would crush it. Tool got all embarrassed and thanked the guys for the hype, asking how they dealt with the other monsters. But Haku just flashed a smile and told him the village was totally safe since he and the bee handled everything. Haku jumps back up and yells that the fight is officially over. Then he and the bee blast off into the sky as the massive forest and mountains fade away behind them. All the village parents were just standing there on the narrow path leading straight to the house. There were little gardens on both sides of the road, and right behind the place, you could see Rose. The village was actually right across the road where the parents were waiting. Tool starts waving like crazy, super hyped to see his mom and dad. The parents were totally stoked to finally have their village back. He rushed over to give his parents a massive hug, and soon the whole village was celebrating and shouting their home's name at the top of their lungs. Atul's dad was grinning ear to ear while his mom cried happy tears, telling him she had a ton to say, but was just glad he was finally home. So Atul hung his... The sky turned dark over the village house, and the dad told his son they finally didn't have to worry about the monster invasion anymore. The dad explains that this massive swarm is called the migration of monsters, so the villagers all hide in the chief's house while a voice tells them they're finally safe. The village leader started grinning and admitted he had no idea his son was this strong, and the son's soul just smiled right back at him. One line out. The input is technically 5 sentences. I should probably treat each sentence as a line, even if they are presented in a paragraph. But the instruction says, do. His parents started cracking up, saying they had no idea the village had such a crazy power, but they told him to stop being so reckless while Asul just gave them a super awkward smile. His parents warned him to keep his powers a secret to avoid any drama, so his dad smiled and headed off to see the village chief, telling everyone else to just hang tight. Atul grinned and offered to tag along with his dad, but the father just smiled back and said he'd handle it on his own, so the headman finally headed out now that... A few days later, a knight in full armor rolls into the village and reads a scroll saying Sol and his dad have to go see Margrave Randolph right away. A whole squad of soldiers was backing up the knight right in front of the house, and when Suil saw them, he totally panicked because his peaceful day was officially ruined. The kid nervously glanced at his dad and started spilling everything his father had told the headman, while the old man just looked away and stayed dead silent. Sweat starts pouring down his dad's face as he explains he told everyone to hide because he and Asul spotted a massive army of monsters charging through the forest. The soldiers and villagers marched right through a field of dead monsters while our hero remembered the massive explosion he used as a distraction, knowing there was no way Mrs. Moore missed it. The soldiers started loading into their wagons while the village felt a dark energy coming from that massive building, and one guy secretly hopped in with them to head straight toward the trap. A bit later, the Soul and his dad ended up at this massive building that looked amazing with giant windows all over it, and the village leader was totally stunned by how incredible it looked. Once they got inside, the guy and his dad strolled down a huge hallway behind the knights. There were tons of girls lined up against the walls, rocking some wild costumes. Atul and his dad finally made it inside one of the rooms. They sat down at a round table in some fancy carved chairs. You could tell they were totally exhausted and super nervous after that long. He frowned, realizing the Margrave's place was way more insane than their farm, like a total dream world he could only imagine. Tool closed his eyes, but when he looked at his shaking dad, he realized the old man was actually way more nervous than he was. Right outside the village, a girl is busy setting the table, and even though she looks like a maid, she's actually rocking a pair of cat ears. She gave a shy little smile as the whole village started thanking her, but then she just turned around and headed out. One guy realized this was his first time ever seeing a beastman, and Atul's dad gave him a shy look and said he thought the girl had a really gentle touch. Atul felt super embarrassed and stared at his dad, then realized his dad should be way more careful about what he says out loud. Suddenly, this guy in a suit pops up behind the village and says it's actually the first time they've ever seen a beastman, totally scaring everyone who didn't see him coming. Atul scowled and his jaw dropped in shock as he spun around toward the voice, while the guy in the suit just started laughing and asked why he looked so freaked out. Atul frowned, realizing he had to be careful since this guy just appeared out of nowhere. The man bowed and introduced himself as Geeman Laurel, the head butler, making Tool watched the guy closely, thinking you'd have to be a total freak to reach that level, and he definitely recognized that surging power from somewhere before. The guy walks over to the door, apologizes for the long wait, and tells Sol and his dad he'll lead them to the office while they watch and listen to him closely. A bit later, the guys end up in a super fancy study inside a massive building. The room is decked out with nice wood furniture and a huge window, and the butler tells them to hang tight while he goes to grab the boss. A blonde guy with a beard walks in and says sorry for being late, while Asul and his dad sit on the couch with a tea set in front of them, and the dad looks totally. The guy just grins at them and says his name is Randolph von Aristel, the king's official margrave, and he already knows he's talking to Poole and his father Lark. He sat down across from his dad and the villagers with a smirk, telling the guys they probably already knew his name, and it was time to talk about what just went down. Awoodle's dad was sweating bullets. He definitely wasn't cracking a smile. The whole village just stood there in total silence, staring him down. The Duke finally spoke up. He glared at the guys and demanded the full story since they saw the monsters first, making the village chief super nervous while the rest of the town just gave him a sweet smile. The village priest was sweating bullets and gave a shaky grin, insisting that the second he saw those monsters, he ran straight to tell the headman. The man bowed low and said the village leader was just a farmer who took his kid into the woods, while Tool's dad nervously explained they were out of medicine, so Tool helped him gather. Atul realized all that practice with his dad was finally paying off as the conversation went perfectly. The man rubbed his chin, looking deep in thought. He even closed his eyes to focus even. The guy scowled because their story actually made sense, but he still felt like they were hiding something, so he suddenly snapped and blamed them for the scary ritual that totally freaked out. The village elder threw his hands up, nervously swearing they were innocent, but Cool just stared ahead, totally lost in thought. The office went dead silent for a moment. The guy realized that just showing off monsters wouldn't be enough to bait some regular country people. It's super sketchy how the farmers... The guy pictured a massive monster war, but claimed 0 damage was done, even though a magician checked the area and realized lightning magic had definitely been used. The village chief's jaw dropped in total shock as he turned to his son, who was just sitting there quietly, hanging on every word of the story. Atul looked away and shut one eye, wishing his dad would stop staring at him so obviously. The guy scowled as he looked over the village. He could tell some insanely powerful mage had been fighting there. The villagers were totally keeping their mouths shut and wouldn't tell him anything. Tool hung his head, his face turning bright red as he admitted he was so terrified he barely remembers a thing. The guy pointed out the elder's house and said it was super sketchy that everyone hid inside while the rest of the village was nowhere to be seen. The guy glared at the village, totally convinced they were lying to his face, and everyone there started getting super nervous. They figured it was time to really turn up the heat and put some... The guy put his hands together and said he heard the village was in the forest when the monsters attacked, while the soul next to him started sweating and looking at him with total panic. The tool wouldn't even look the guy in the eye. He could tell it was totally avoiding his gaze. It was obvious he was keeping a huge secret. Then he glared at the whole... Atul's vision started fading to black as his eyes drifted shut, and he realized fighting deadly monsters was way easier than sitting through this interrogation. He knew he had to find a way out. He squeezed his eyes shut, sweat pouring down his face as he realized his peaceful life was officially over. But then the door suddenly flew open and a girl's voice screamed out Randolph's name. It was actually Mrs. Moore, and Karina looked totally different with her hair down in that stunning dress, but she had this super weird vibe as the mistress demanded Randolph explain exactly what was going on. Tool stared ahead in pure terror, his jaw hitting the floor the moment he realized Mrs. Moore had just walked into the office. The guy scowls and looks over at Mrs. Moore to call the girl's name, while Atul just sits on the couch staring at her as Mrs. Moore hits him with a... The guy just grins and claims they're talking about serious business, but Moore's vibe goes totally dark as she steps up and tells him to shut his mouth right now. The guy hung his head in shame and promised to follow every order, making a nearby soul's jaw drop in total shock. Moore points her finger right in the guy's face and blasts him for picking on a kid, making him sweat bullets as he tries to make up a lame excuse. Mora scowled and poked the guy right on the nose, lecturing him about double-checking his work instead of just winging it, while Asul stood back with his arms crossed, nervously watching the drama unfold. Moore's face went totally dark as a wicked grin spread across her lips, and since she decided this guy needed to pay, she was more than ready to step on him. Moore balled her fists and started stomping on the guy, but he actually started screaming with joy, while Soul and his dad watched the whole thing in pure terror. Stick to the core action. Final polish. Moore flashed a grin at a stool and apologized to it and the Margrave. Then she went right back to stomping her boot into the... Moore is literally standing on the Margrave's face with a big smile, casually suggesting they forget the drama and grab some tea while Asul just stares at her, completely terrified and confused. They started pouring the tea, and Moore said they were still super confused after that monster parade. Sol sat there with his hands in his lap and agreed Moore was right, while the village chief just stared. Moore walked up to the village and told everyone he could use magic. Asul squinted one eye and said he could do a bit himself. The girl put her hand to her chin and started thinking. The girl sipped on her drink while Atul stuffed his face with cookies and looked for more, convinced she knew he was the one who took down the monsters, even though she kept it a total secret. Atul took a bite of the snack and was totally caught off guard when Mrs. Moore told him those cookies were actually fire. Moore looked down at the mugs and explained that these sweets are a massive hit in the capital but super hard to find, leaving Asul totally stunned. The girl walks into the village with a huge grin, complaining about how hard it is to get a basket of cookies and wishing someone would bake them for her family, while a terrified Sol just stares. Atul turned bright red as he looked at Moore's grin, finally realizing she'd look the other way about him joining the fight if he just agreed to bake her some cookies. Atul threw his hands up, realizing Moore had totally caught him, so he stopped trying to hide it. He just closed his eyes with a smirk and laughed, saying Mr. Lebrandre also complained that the cookies were undercooked. Atul blushed and grinned, saying he'd heard these cookies were actually super hard to bake, so he decided he wasn't going to make a whole bunch of them. Moore just flashed a smile and said there's probably still a merchant out there who'd buy all those cookies in bulk. Atul gave a nervous little grin and suggested they just ask Mr. Lebrant about the guy, totally sure he'd finally figured the whole thing out. The guy closed his eyes and decided he just had to get his hands on that cookie recipe. Moore flashed a super creepy grin. She walked up to the village and told everyone that Moore says if this guy knows the truth, then Lebrant is definitely hiding his identity on purpose, and the minion turns pale and starts panicking. Atul imagined Moore smiling while holding his head and realized he was totally trapped, forced to do whatever she wanted because she's way scarier than even the Margrave. Moore walked right up to him with a huge grin and announced she wanted to be friends with the village from now on, and even though he was sweating bullets, he told her he was totally down for the idea. She flashed him a huge smile while still cradling his head, telling him she hoped they'd be best friends forever. Atul and his dad sat on the couch across from Moore, and after Atul finally snapped his father back to his senses, they got right back to their conversation. Atul thought about Miss Moore and figured they had plenty of time to talk about being friends, especially since he always sends her his new inventions first to keep their business deal going strong. Atul nervously watched Mrs. Moore's smile until she ended the talk by telling him they should definitely just stay friends. As the carts rolled away from the Moore house, Piyud realized she wasn't a total villain despite the stalking and blackmailing, especially since she even hooked him up with some free gifts. One line out? Yes. 5 sentences in, 5 sentences out. No line breaks? Yes. Simple/teen language? Yes. The village leader was shaking in his boots the moment he saw his wife. A super dark aura flared up around her as she glared daggers at him. She was losing it because he was caught red. A few years pass by, and life in the ancient world is totally chill and quiet. We see a little baby girl hanging out in her crib with a bib around her neck. Suddenly, Tool flashed a massive grin while asking his sister how she was doing, and the whole village finally felt like their family was whole again. Adele reached out to help her, and Mom just stood there smiling, saying the whole village was probably obsessed with her sister. Atul agreed that Sia was the sweetest, but deep down, he was already. The Tool balled up his fist and grinned, swearing he'd do whatever it takes so she can live a totally stress-free life, not just for her, but for his parents and himself too. The parents stood there glowing with pride, telling everyone they were having a second kid because their life was perfect and their son was pure gold, making village blush like crazy since he wasn't expecting all. Atul turned bright red, flashing a huge grin as he reached out to call his parents. As the sun started to set, shadows stretched across the Atul family home. He realized all those years. He showed off a massive feast and realized he couldn't have made these epic dishes without Mrs. Moore hooking him up with all those ingredients. The village showed off a brand new smoking stove. This thing didn't even exist in this world before. It became a massive hit with everyone. Someone even figured Mrs. Moore was just obsessed. Atul introduced Mrs. Moore while she hid her face behind a fan, and since he was selling her so much stuff for big money, he even shared his recipes to get a sweet cut of the village looked just like a busy city street full of shops. And while the Tool felt like everything was going great, Lebrant opened a shop in the capital to sell the special gear. The Tool pictured his cozy house and garden, realizing he wasn't a broke farmer anymore, and could finally just kick back to enjoy his chill life in the country. Mir and Awul finally ran into each other right outside the village, and when she waved and shouted his name, they both started blushing like crazy while Awul gave her a massive grin. Mir closed her eyes with a huge smile, and honestly, she's getting so pretty lately that the guy gets totally nervous every time he tries to talk to her. His sister and Mireille were hanging out right at the edge of the woods. Olule's sister was just chilling on the ground, waving her arms around and looking super happy. Olule. Mireille walked up to the village with a big grin, hoping she'd finally learn something cool today. Ogul just closed his eyes and smiled, totally down for whatever she had, and Aul reaches out his hand and starts casting a spell. Mireille stands right beside him, watching his every move. Since she's been so into magic lately, Aul decides. Suddenly, this weird light started glowing out of nowhere. The boys were just chilling at home and decided to whip up some food. Figured that since Muri had water magic, he'd definitely. Mireille gripped the knife tight in her hands. She closed her eyes and just started laughing like a maniac. Ahul remembered how she's always bringing up marriage out of nowhere. It totally weird. A little later, a fool, his sister, and Mireille ended up back in the forest. A fool started showing off by making a mini hurricane, and the girls were totally loving. The village was super quiet, and the guys out in the woods decided they were finally done training for the day. Marie thanked the town for all their help, and then handed a letter over. Mavilage grabbed the letter and started reading every single word. Right then, the village's chill life was about to get hit with a ton of trouble. Mari leaned in right next to, "Now we're heading straight to the capital of the Kingdom of Liod. Right at the top of a mountain sits a massive castle with huge towering walls. Just below that hill is the city itself. This massive building looked totally epic with its tiled roof and a garden full of stone statues surrounding it. Inside one of the rooms, there was a drink and a basket of cookies just sitting there on the... This girl with her hair in pigtails stares at a cookie and says that liver is actually a super popular sweet right now, even though this snack looks totally basic and just like all the others. She's just holding the cookie, then she takes a big bite, and suddenly her eyes pop wide open in total shock. She starts scarfing down the whole cookie and can't stop talking about how good it is. From the huge size to the insane flavor, this thing is literally perfect. It's totally different. Blushing a bit, she turned to the guy at the door and told him she really wanted to meet the person who made those cookies. This guy Albus put his hand over his heart and promised with a grin that he'd find her a man as fast as he possibly could. She was rocking a dress with dark stripes. She just kept munching on those cookies. Crumbs were literally all over her face. Then she started talking to herself. She couldn't believe how... Our story kicks off in the capital of the Laide Kingdom at the Lebrant Trading House, where a small brick building sits right in the middle of a super crowded square full. Lebrant sat at a wooden table with 2 frames and 2 iron cups, totally locked in as he read every single word of the letter in his hands. Lebrant started sweating like crazy and wiping his face, realizing his business was a huge deal now that high-ranking nobles and even the royal family were checking out his village. Albus is just chilling at the counter waving at the shopkeeper, but Lebrant remembers seeing the Adams family's head butler digging for info from the merchants, while a bunch of other people. The carriage was zooming toward the mountains, and Lebrant knew he had to find Mrs. Moore ASAP, but he was pretty sure they couldn't hide the village from these dangerous guys for... Lebrant was at Mrs. Moore's mansion when he dropped some huge news. Every noble family in the kingdom was suddenly eyeing their village, making Mrs. Moore cover her face and close her eyes to think it all over. Lebrant and Moore are sitting across from each other when Moore drops some heavy news that things just got way more dangerous. To keep the village safe, Moore explains they have to cut Libri. Under a big chandelier, Lebrant and Moore decide to keep the village in the dark for now. But Lebrant says he'll send a letter with the full story later. Fast forward a few weeks, and the action is finally shifting over to the Lebrant Trading House. Albus stood by the stalls watching the crowd, seeing a merchant hand a kid a package while a woman picked out some items nearby. Albus noticed the shop was way emptier than last week, and all the items on the counter had just vanished while a super dark and mysterious vibe surrounded him. Albus narrowed his eyes, wondering how all the popular stuff vanished so fast, and if one guy really delivered it all alone. He'd heard some wild rumors about bacon but didn't buy them. Albus is chilling at the bar across from a guy in a suit, thinking about how 10 villagers could get bacon way cheaper than in the city, while Aldred waves his hand to order a cold ale. The tavern was buzzing with people while Albus chilled with his drink, but the bartenders dropped a total bombshell about a guy from that village who visited once, and apparently, he tasted even better than the bacon they fed him. Albus closed his eyes with a smirk, and suggested that the bartender might actually remember the name of the village that guy came from. The guy rubbed his chin and said he couldn't remember, but he knew this village was seriously creepy, especially with all those weird liquid-filled bottles sitting on the rack behind him. Albus pictured a massive army of monsters with weapons, but the bartender said that when they invaded, the whole fight was over in just half a day, and since nobody even got a scratch, it was like God himself was protecting them. Albus narrowed his eyes and said he'd already heard the news. Up in that massive castle on the hill, everything was dead silent. He ended up in a room totally filled with... Albus was checking out a book with weird writing and a map, feeling totally sketched out by all the different stories about what was happening, until he finally said the name, Onin Village, out. Eventually, Albus makes it to the Merchant Guild, but the guy at the counter has never even heard of his village, even though the place is totally packed with paperwork and barrels from the big cities. Clouds drifted over the Libra building as Albus realized someone was pulling the strings behind the scenes. But when he hit up the Adventurers Guild, they straight up refused to tell him where Onin was hiding. This guy with a massive scar on his face just sat there grinning over his drink. He promised them there aren't any hunters at all in Onin Village. The food is supposedly amazing and super cheap. Albus poured a drink for a guy with a huge scar on his face. He knew right then that he'd finally found a massive lead. The scarred man thanked Albus for being so cool and... Right in the middle of a massive forest clearing, a huge crowd was busy pitching tents while merchant carts showed up packed with gear. Owl and Mireille are hanging out at a shop where Owl says the Harvest Festival is going to be a total blast, and Mireille mentions that everyone from the nearby villages shows up for it every single year. Mireille flashed a massive grin, bragging that this was her 3rd year running the village stall. Azul closed his eyes and smiled back, telling her how much he really appreciated her. She was always there. A bunch of cows were just chilling out in the field. The whole village was getting ready for a massive 2-day harvest festival. They were even holding a contest to see which shop stall was. Everyone's working like crazy to set up the stalls, and since that massive prize brought in all the nearby villages, this year's festival is twice as big as it's ever. A dark-haired guy with a super wrinkled forehead walks up to the village with a big grin, asking how everyone's doing, and Suel smiles back, welcoming the village chief and telling him everything is going great. With a bit of a blush, the guy asked why the chief changed the festival so much, but the chief just laughed and said it was all thanks to the village. He showed off the old village next to the new one, explaining that while the kid wanted to bail ASAP, the village actually scored some major perks from the Margraves that totally flipped the place around. Looking out at the village, the guy says he's throwing this contest as a big thank you, and even though everyone's sure the local stall is going to win, he has to. The village was buzzing with energy, and while A-Cool realized he really loves his home, he didn't do all this work just to upgrade the town. But since the chief and that scarred guy was standing right there next to the village leader, he just raised his hand and gave a wave to everyone in town. The chief looked over and confirmed it was actually the legendary. The village chief closed his eyes and gave a small bow, saying he'd never seen Glenn's guards in this area before, and introduced himself as Maruga, the man in charge. Albus bows low with a hand on his stomach, smiling as he thanks them for the hospitality, and introduces himself as the butler for the Duchy of Adams. Back at the Margraves estate, Moore was absolutely fuming because the Duke's butler had actually reached Onan Village, so she barked at Jane Jamon to get a carriage ready. Moore grit her teeth in total rage, declaring that the boy was hers and she'd never let anyone take his freedom, all while gripping her fan tight. Morning finally hits, and the big harvest festival is officially starting as birds soar over the mountains. A 2-horse carriage starts rolling away from the house. You can see green fields and thick trees lined. While riding in a carriage, a long-haired blonde guy says the person who made this sweet treat definitely lives in a boring middle-of-nowhere town, and the dark-haired dude says, the carriage pulls up to a 2-story house, and Gal's totally down for this revenge, saying the guy should be begging on his knees just to work for the Count's second son, while Siras says he needs to speak with the headman. Sierra stepped inside, put a hand to his chest, and apologized for dropping by so suddenly, introducing himself as the butler of Phelan County, and asking if the owner had a moment to chat. Siras shot a nasty look over at Albus. Standing in the hallway, the guy just laughed, saying he never expected to run into the Count's butler in a tiny village like this. Saras tells Albus he's a servant for the Duchy of Adams, but Albus just closes his eyes with a smirk and says his name is Albus. Then they start talking about where. Separis flashed a creepy grin, saying he was just following his master's orders, but he knew his goals were the same as Albus's, and Albus just smirked back because he totally agreed. Siras wanted to talk to the headman, but since the guy wasn't around, he decided it was time to bounce. Just then, a dude with a scar on his face walked in. The guys just kept on gossiping about the Count's family. As a creepy shadow gathered over the building, Elvis shut his eyes and realized the rumors about the Count's son were actually true. Albus snaps his eyes open and looks to the side, knowing the Count's son will do anything to reach the top, and he's actually hyped to see what the guy's next. Everyone in Onan Village went wild and cheered when the leaders announced the Harvest Festival was finally starting, while flags were already flying high on top of the tents. The market stalls were all packed super close together. Shopkeepers were showing off all kinds of cool gear to the crowd. You could see big wooden barrels sitting right next to the tents. Tons of people were. Aul and Mireille were behind their shop counter with all their items on display. But a massive line of people started forming, leaving Mireille totally shocked while our guy started getting really nervous. The guys shared a grin, hyped about the massive crowd this year, so they jumped on their benches to sell food while Mireille stood out front, calling everyone over to join the fun. Things finally started to quiet down, and as Sol wiped sweat off his bright red face, the villagers saw the crowds thinning out and decided it was time to take a break for lunch. The Count's second son started shoving through the crowd, acting totally annoyed and demanding the shop owner hand over those cookies right this second. Mireille and Avul stared at the guy in total shock, and while Mireille wondered if Avul recognized him, Avul just called him a typical dumb, stuck-up noble as. Mireille tells the village to stay back and decides to handle him herself, sneaking up behind the guy with some cookies and a big smile to ask if he wants to buy some, which totally catches him off guard. The guy's eyes went totally wild as he flashed Mireille a super creepy grin, and while she just stood there frozen, he suddenly started screaming about how gorgeous she was, and that he was gonna. The guy throws his arms wide and yells with his eyes shut that she's gonna marry the head of Filal County. But while he's making all these big promises, Mir just smiles and puts her hand up to shut him down. The guy starts panicking and yelling, demanding to know why they rejected him, but Marius just jams cookies into his mouth and tells him nobody would ever work with him, so he should just finish his snack and get out. The whole village just stood back while the neighbors laughed and watched the drama unfold, leaving Onul to give a shaky smile and joke about how Mireille really has a sharp tongue. The guy's face turned beet red as he balled up his fist and screamed that they'd never forget him, leaving Osul and Mireille totally stunned while the whole crowd just pointed and laughed. Mireille was totally shocked that the guy just dipped without paying, but Onul just laughed it off as the festival kept going, and everyone went back to checking out the shops. A horse-drawn carriage rolled out of the village with two guys inside, where Setarest closed his eyes and claimed he could pull it off if the Lord would just listen, while the earls, thinking back to his friend's smiles, the man told Samaris to spy on the village, track everyone the girl hangs out with, and find her secret crush, and Samaris was totally ready. The Count's son balled up his fist with a nasty smirk, vowing to crush Marie's boyfriend himself, so she'd have no choice but to beg at his feet while a horse carriage pulls up right in front of a big 2-story house. The Count's son is laughing his head off so loud that the whole street can hear him. Little do they know, Albus rolls up to the shop with a wave and a grin, joking that if Mireille isn't the one baking those cookies, he's gotta meet the chef, leaving her totally stunned as a massive crowd starts lining up behind him. Mireille's face turned bright red as she explained that another noble was making demands on the village. But this time the guy was actually super handsome and acted like a polite butler, while Al just stood there looking totally embarrassed in his peaked cap. A living stool walks up to Albus to apologize, but get this, he's actually the one who baked the cookies. Albus says sorry for distracting him and tells him the treats are. The guy nervously raised his hands and offered to help, but Albus just closed his eyes with a grin, saying he really wanted to meet the person who made such an awesome item. Atul frowned at the guy, thinking that even though he sounded super convincing, there was something seriously mysterious lurking deep inside him. Atul realized that was the only reason he'd been called, and as he gave Albus a tired stare, Albus just smirked and leaned in close, making the whole vibe between them get super intense. Albus cracked a smile, impressed that a kid this young actually got it, and invited Asul to the capital. But Asul just grinned back and said he wasn't supposed to hang out with strangers. Albus clutched his chest and closed his eyes, feeling bad for everything the village had suffered. This guy's name is Albus, and he's the butler for the big. Asul leaned down and told the guy to just call him Asul, but he'd have to head to the capital with Albus because Albus's boss really wanted to meet the person who. Atul smirked and leaned in, saying he was honored but wasn't sure if this was a good idea, so Albus promised him 10 gold coins as a reward, leaving him wondering what the. Atul flashed a shaky smile, thinking about how 10 gold coins was worth a cool million yen. Man, that's a tempting offer. He told them it was hard to turn down, but he'd. Albus puts his hand to his chest and turns away from the village. He tells them he'll be staying at the chief's place for a while. If the village changes their mind. Albus started heading out of the village, but a soul watching from afar realized that a butler bringing the creator to meet his mistress was totally weird, and definitely felt suspicious. Night hit, and a massive moon started peeking out from the clouds. People were still everywhere, just walking around and shopping for gear. Every single shop had a bright torch hanging up that lit up the whole. Way past the busy market, a 2-horse carriage was parked right outside the elder's house. Suddenly, the Duke's son frowned, began screaming that Lee Saris finally tracked down that one line out. The input was a block of text. I'm providing a block of text. No new lines? Yes. Isolation? Each sentence is. Saroths remembers Wool's face and mentions that a girl named Murray really cares about him, and since she knows every recipe by heart, she helps him out with all the crafting. The Count's son starts screaming in Sirius's face that he's dead serious about taking over the whole village and Murray for himself, and Sirius just closes his eyes, bows his head, and tells the guy he's absolutely right. The Count's son was absolutely fuming, glaring at Siras and ordering him to take out the kid today with 0 witnesses. Cyrano looked at his master, totally ready to do whatever This tall guy was walking right next to a cart pulled by 2 horses. He was decked out in total black. You couldn't even see his face. He had a headdress, and the Duke's son started laughing like a maniac, shouting that he'd take out the kid, get the girl, and steal all that knowledge too, feeling like luck was finally on his side. The Duke's son is just chilling alone in his carriage when someone suddenly knocks on the door, and since the guy outside says he wants to talk about the village, the kid actually decides to step out. The Duke's son jumps out of the carriage with his fists clenched, looking around the dark night. He starts nervously shouting for the stranger to just show up and say what they want, while the carriage door stays wide open behind him. Suddenly, the whole vibe got way darker and creepier. A mysterious dark shadow popped up right behind the Duke's son. The guy was holding something and started swinging it full force at him. Suddenly, a massive bang rings out as blood sprays into the air, and the carriage sits wide open under a blinding light. After a bit, the whole village went dead silent. Everyone started heading back to their homes and clearing out. But then, a dark shadow of a stranger appeared right by one of the houses. Our hero is snoozing so hard he's literally drooling, but then a suspicious rustling sound snaps him wide awake. The second he wakes up, he remembers his place is totally secure because he set up magic alarms to stop thieves, but then he suddenly senses someone lurking right outside the wall. He uses his spatial vision to spot a weapon in the guy's right hand, and instantly knows this isn't just some random drunk, because drunks don't usually carry stuff like that. This dude uses magic to vanish into thin air for a sneak attack, and he's totally about to wreck whoever dared to wake him up. This mysterious guy is totally lost because he can't sense any mana, and he's freaking out because our hero was standing right there just a second ago. Out of nowhere, our MC pops up right behind the guy, leaving him totally frozen in shock as he asks what the man in black was doing leaving stuff at his house so late at night. Tool gives the stranger a super annoyed look, and the guy gets so spooked by his voice that he jumps back and hurls his weapon at the kid. He blocks the blades with raw strength, throws his arms wide to crank up his magic, and launches a massive counterattack. The kid slams his power right into the mercenary's shield, and even though he blocked it in time, the hit is so heavy it makes his legs buckle. He narrows his eyes at the stranger, thinking about how this mage is just dodging everything and hiding behind a shield, and he's already wondering how much longer the dude can keep this up. Our MC starts whipping up these mini tornadoes just to see if this random dude is actually tough enough to handle it. He finishes summoning those massive hurricanes and blasts them at the mystery guy, screaming a spell that makes the ground totally explode. The guy lands a massive hit and a huge cloud of dust kicks up, making him think he finally got him. But as the smoke clears, all he sees is the killer's empty cloak hitting the floor. He grabs the raincoat looking totally frustrated, scanning it for any clues that might reveal who the attacker is. The guy managed to escape, but that hit was totally worth it because he's so beat up he won't be coming back for more anytime soon. The soul scratches his head, turns around, and heads for the house, thinking he can finally get some sleep. A peaceful morning at a mountain house is suddenly shattered by a scream, so this guy rushes over to help and finds a girl pointing at a man lying on the ground covered in blood. Mir leads the young man to a guy who's in really bad shape after taking a brutal hit to the head that knocked him out cold and left him wincing in pain. Our MC leans over and tells the guy he's a noble who just drifted in with his friend, but the girl admits she thought he was just a passed-out drunk until she saw all the blood. The crowd starts buzzing around the guy lying face down, making the young man super nervous as he begs everyone to just stay calm. Suddenly, a girl in a flashy dress pushes through the crowd, claiming she's the Count's wife and promising to handle everything. Then he tells everyone to get away from the crime. This lady tracks down the butler from yesterday to ask for help with the case, and Mr. Albus is totally down because the Count's son actually got hurt on her property. The white-haired guy scans the area and mentions the Falale family's butler is missing, which totally catches the young man off guard. The tool digs through his memories and realizes the person who jumped him in the dark might actually be that same butler. Out of nowhere, he feels someone staring, and it's McGraw's wife leaning in to ask him over, making the whole situation super awkward and confusing. She puts her hands on her hips and leans right in his face, demanding he tell her what he's hiding. And even though he tries to play dumb at first, he finally caves and agrees to spill everything. Looking around, our MC breaks down the night incident while the Earl's wife asks if the Falali butler attacked him, mentioning rumors that the guy was actually a secret spy for the crown. She gets right in his face, making him super flustered, and promises to keep her mouth shut if he helps her find the culprit, so he agrees to give it his all. The butler checks the body and realizes there's zero magic involved, so the attacker must have used a blunt weapon, and since the wound isn't that bad, they decide to carry him back to the house. Everyone stares at the wound and realizes something is totally off. Then the girl in the hat points out some weird white dust on the knocked-out guy's head, and the young man asks what that stuff is even for. The butler catches up with the couple and suggests they grill the locals for info, so the girl agrees it's time to start scouting the village for clues. Our 3 investigators are hitting the streets, asking everyone they pass if they saw anything sketchy go down last night. The first guy blocking our hero's path claims he drank way too much yesterday and doesn't remember a single thing. A few of the guys actually come through with info on a black-haired butler who was asking weird questions about everyone's friends while digging through every stall looking for something. The butler helping with the case flashes a friendly smile and asks a random person at the market if they've seen a bloody, heavy object anywhere. One woman says she didn't see a thing, but then the gray-haired guy runs into a dark-haired dude who starts talking about that mysterious figure in black all over again. The butler knows the whole town is gossiping about that Philo family servant, but he thinks it's super sketchy that so many people have actually spotted him. Magra's wife is busy asking the villagers how they treated the victims and if the guy had any enemies, but it's honestly super sketchy that so many people saw him. This blonde girl in a headscarf says with a totally straight face that the guy who got his head smashed in acted like he was the center of the world, so it's no wonder someone tried to take him out. Another angry guy walks by and says everyone hated the victim, because even though he'd only been in town for one day, the whole village had already complained to the chief about him. The old man blocked the girl too, and then he started roasting the injured guy, calling him a rich brat with 0 brains who just gets on everyone's nerves. The group realized they barely found any clues, so they decided to go talk to the village chief since he's the one who heard all the drama about that jerk traveler from the locals. The trio headed straight to the village chief to talk things over. The dark-haired guy told him that a bunch of locals were already complaining about how weird the stranger was acting. He explained the chief's never pulled off a 2-day festival before, so he's hitting up Mr. Albus to make sure everything goes perfectly, and nobody ends up with bad memories. The butler and our main guy stay totally silent, so the girl asks why he's actually taking 2 whole days off for the holidays this year. The dark-haired guy tells her she probably knows how all the kids used to ditch this village, but lately, the population has actually been blowing up, and he never even dreamed things would turn around like this. Out of nowhere, the village chief starts bowing and says the population boom is all thanks to the village's hard work, making our young hero blush like crazy from the awkwardness. The kid stutters and waves his hands, telling the guy to look up since he doesn't need any thanks, then blurts out that he loves the village just as much as the man does. The girl facepalms and sadly admits that they're totally stuck because they don't have a single suspect who could actually pull off a crime against someone that powerful. Albus shuts his eyes, and when the blonde guy catches it, he realizes the village feels totally different about what was just said, which completely catches him off guard. Our guy is blown away that the butler figured it all out, so he just laughs and tells the adventurers to hunt down the murder weapon in the village. He confidently heads the opposite way from his crew, telling the butler they need to go back and have a serious talk with that guy. McGraw's wife stares at them both totally confused, asking if they're trying to say they finally know who the killer is. The girl looks super suspicious again and points out that Ms. Mule's place is tucked away in a quiet corner where nobody saw anything weird, so how on earth did they figure it all out? He hates to admit it, but he's gonna spill the whole story to his friend, starting with how a bunch of witnesses straight up lied to their faces. He remembers those first 3 guys the detectives talked to, the ones who said they were wasted all night, and realizes they're the ones who totally played the whole team. He keeps explaining, but then he starts wondering how everyone knew Gals was lying in a pool of blood by his house, when they never even mentioned the exact time he fell. He notices the word night keeps popping up in everyone's stories, but he has no idea why they're all so sure the attack actually happened then. The villagers are super loyal and lied to the nobles to protect the killer, and our hero totally gets it since he's just a regular country boy himself. Our main guy starts overthinking everything to finally find an answer. He realizes the killer is actually a big deal around the village. He's the same person who always greets the fancy nobles. The young guy glances back at the hunched man and asks the village chief if he even gets what he's saying. He rubs his tired eyes and bursts out laughing, admitting that there's absolutely no hiding anything from our main guy. Looking totally heartbroken, she stares at the old man and asks him why he would ever do something like that. The village chief says his reason was simple. Gals wanted to kill someone just to force Makari into a marriage. The dark-haired guy says he's super grateful for everything, but since he loves everyone in this village like his own kids, he just can't ignore what Gels told him. Mrs. Mule and the butler watched the whole thing go down, and then asked where the weapon was since they couldn't find it anywhere. The guy asks if that tool was actually just a chunk of rock salt, and the village leader looks totally blown away that he figured it out. The guy says he expected nothing less from our hero, confirming it really was rock salt meant for the festival that they just dissolved in the water. The girl in the hat announces they finally found the murder weapon, but the butler just laughs and says the whole truth is finally out. The countess confidently asks about the rumors of goblin and orc attacks, but the village chief looks totally clueless about the whole thing. The guy explains that orcs usually just wander out of the woods in small packs without causing much trouble. But Miss Mule keeps twisting her story, blaming those monsters for why the weapon and witnesses are totally gone. The countess points out that Falela's head wound looks exactly like it was made by an orc's baton, and then she looks right at Albus to see if he agrees. Albus throws his head back and laughs, admitting the girl was right about it being a monster attack while the village chief just stands there totally confused. Mrs. Mule asks the butler to help her write the report, but he says he'll handle it since they've already decided to blame orcs for jumping the Marquis's second son in the middle of the night. The gray-haired guy gives her a sneaky look and promises to do whatever she wants if she pays up, so she asks him exactly how much this is going to cost her. Countess Bowser squints and looks behind her, asking if moving the whole village to the capital counts as payment, which completely catches the guy off guard. The butler says the deal is way too good to pass up, and the girl reminds him she's been protecting this village forever, so now he officially owes her one. The village leader starts screaming at the top of his lungs, insisting that he's the only one who should take the fall for the crime. This friendly-looking guy with a sneaky grin warns them that trying to kill the count's son is a huge crime, and now the whole village is going to suffer right along with their leader. The butler asks the chief for permission to help out the village, forcing him to just go along with the plan, and then he asks if they're all on the same page. The headman finally chills out because moving to the Duchy of Atoms is a total win, since those nobles actually don't care about money or power, making it the best place to live. Even if he says no, rich jerks like Gals are eventually going to hunt him down, and they'll make the whole village suffer right along with him. The guy sighs and admits he only argued because he loves the village and everyone in it, and since he owes Mrs. Mule big time, he's totally down with the plan. The village leader bows down again, admitting this whole mess is his fault and begging the guy for forgiveness. This jerk throws his hands up and yells that the hero shouldn't bow so easily, swearing he was just trying to do the right thing to keep him and Mishra safe. He finishes his speech by asking one more time to keep things chill and avoid a fight, and the village leader just thanks him again. The next morning the news broke that monsters had attacked Marquila Filatel's son, and the few villagers who knew the real story kept their mouths shut for the rest of their lives. Mr. Gowls finally woke up and remembered the truth, but Mrs. Mule shut him down by threatening to expose his butler's actions if he tried to make a move. Even after all that drama, the Harvest Festival was a huge success, and Marie's village shop actually ended up winning the whole thing. A few days later, our hero heads out to the Duchy of Atoms, and while his parents nag him to eat well, he promises to bring back some awesome souvenirs from the capital. The chief warns him that the capital is a total nightmare for outsiders, but he's hyped because he knows the kid will make it big, and promises they'll all be waiting for his. A girl he knows rushes up and promises to be the perfect bride by the time he gets back from the duchy, leaving him totally stunned. He watches her from behind, planning to return next spring, totally clueless about his mom's secret scheme while she acts like she's completely innocent. Out of nowhere, Mir walks up and kisses him on the cheek, leaving the guy standing there totally frozen in shock. He rubs his sore cheek and glares at her, but she just blushes and says it's a magic charm to keep him from hitting on girls in the capital. He starts walking toward the city gates to finally head out, but his girlfriend stops him and says she almost forgot something. She hands him a folded letter and tells him to open it the moment he gets to the capital, and he's totally shocked that Miss Ray actually wrote him a message. He's looking super suspicious because he thinks this whole letter is just a prank, figuring his mom was probably too embarrassed to say it to his face. He heads for the carriage but stops to wave at his family and girlfriend while they cheer him on and wish him the best of luck on his journey. The moment the guy sits next to Albus in the carriage, he admits he's been so busy that they haven't had a real chance to talk about why the duchy even needs this village. This guy says he was summoned to a different place and it definitely wasn't to chill out, and the butler confirms he's 100% right. Albus says the girl wants a taste of the village's daily food, so he suggests the MC teach the chefs his recipes for a massive payday. The guy says he totally expected this but swears his gear is top-shelf quality, while the Duchess's servant talks big to make sure he doesn't try to charge them a crazy price. After a long talk, Mr. Albus showed him how to drive the carriage and gave him the lowdown on the capital and his new job. The two heroes finally reach the duchy, and since he's totally crushing on her, he gets super hyped telling her how massive the capital is. Tool finally opens the letter his mom told him to read the second he reached the capital, and as they're driving, he lets out a scream that echoes across the whole field. The letter starts with a message from his mom, who knows he's already made it to the capital, and she's got some big news about their village. She keeps writing about how her son is a total genius, and she refuses to let him stay stuck in some tiny village forever. Because of everything she'd been through, she asked Mr. Albus for a shot at the entrance exams for the capital's Ruins Magic Academy, which officially open up this spring. The message says that after 3 years of training at the academy, he needs to travel the world and start stacking up some serious cash. Mom also filled him in on Mariah, who's been begging for tips on how to be the perfect wife, so her training is already underway. But Mom made it clear that if he finds someone, he's hanging out at the duchy for now, but the moment he starts school, he's moving into the dorms to live totally on his own. He finally gets what his girlfriend meant before she left, but he's also fuming because his family didn't even bother to ask him what he thought about it. He figures his mom is super sharp and realized that since he's down for the capital trip, he definitely wants to join the Magic Academy and see the world. He's totally down with the deal since the Addams family seems cool for now, so he figures he might as well kick it in the royal capital for a bit. Albus turns to the guy next to him and asks if he finished the letter, saying he's hyped to work together, and the village confirms they've been linked to his family for a really long time. The butler just laughs and says they'll worry about the Magic Academy next year, but as they pull up, the guy is totally shocked by how massive the Duke's mansion actually is. The second a soul arrives, the servants all line up to greet him, then they show him to his room and later take him to the bath. After getting all cleaned up, he's led straight to the dining hall to find a massive feast of incredible food made with all kinds of ingredients. Albus watches the guy chow down and asks if he likes the mansion, but the kid is so blown away by the place that he's literally speechless. Right after he finishes eating, the guy is led straight to the girl, who steps out and introduces herself as Adams von Allistrat, the oldest daughter of the Addams family. She says sorry for being blunt but asks if he's the one who actually made the cookies, while another soul apologizes for his rough talk since he's just a regular commoner. Next thing you know, he's handing her a basket of muffins to try, and she immediately takes a big bite of one of the cookies. The oldest daughter of the Addams family grabs our MC's hands, shouting that this is exactly what she needs, and she's totally shocked a kid invented it but is super hyped to meet him. He's totally blushing and says he's happy to meet her, but she tells him to just call her Alice and stop being so formal. She claims he's basically her property since she invited him, but she promises her family is super chill with commoners and won't force him to do anything he hasn't learned yet. The tool looks back at the butler and says that since Alice gave the green light, he's staying at her place until next spring and is super stoked to finally meet her. She gets totally flustered and tells him he's being way too polite since they're literally the same age. So he agrees and asks if he can ask her one quick question. Our hero finally asks the big question that's been eating at him the whole trip. Why did this Dutch girl want to see him so badly? And she tells him she's actually got a few reasons. Alice says she was just super curious to meet the person shaking up the dessert world, and she's actually got a little favor to ask. She asks him to help her plan a massive party that's about to go down at her family's mansion. The young Duchess promises to cover every single cost and wants him to teach her chefs his secret recipes. But he can still handle the cooking himself even though her big birthday party is only 2 weeks. Our guy gives her a massive side-eye as he finally figures out their real plan. But since he's stuck there until spring anyway, he decides to just play along and spill all his cooking secrets. He knows you can't have a birthday without a cake, but in this new world, nobody has even heard of one, and the village is hyped because they think having all these chefs will make them... He figures that since his client is a duchess, he can get on her good side and ask for a huge favor later, making this a sweet deal for him. Our guy gives a slow nod and tells the young Duchess he's down with her plan, and she's so hyped that she folds her hands together with a huge grin. The guy throws his hands out and tells them they can worry about the party later, because right now, he just wants the butler and his lady to bring him some fresh milk and eggs. Alice is super hyped because she scored a deal on some sugar, but the guy tells her not to sweat it since he's already got his own stash. That totally catches the Duchess and Albus off guard, and they ask if he's really the guy who supplied all that top-tier sugar to the capital. The villagers beg him to keep it a secret, and the servant from the Duchy of Adam promises he won't say a word. But with every noble in the capital hunting for sugar, the guy gives a shy little grin, starts laughing nervously, and tries to act like he's just a totally normal farmer. Things got super busy for our guy after that talk, and even though the Duke's chefs totally hated him at first, they gained a ton of respect for him the moment he started cooking. The kitchen crew started to really look up to him, and before long, they were basically treating him like he was the big boss in charge. A few minutes later, Alice strolls into the kitchen, spots the new test dishes, and immediately devours them with a huge grin. This ball was a total blowout with 500 guests invited, and as the tool prepped food samples, he served the Duke and Duchess, who actually turned out to be super chill. They met up with Mr. Albus and the whole kitchen crew to plan out the perfect menu for the big ball. With 500 guests to feed, they had to be super smart about the menu since they were running dangerously low on ingredients. The servants decided to go with apple pie since they had plenty of ingredients, and it was a total fan favorite. Lately, the maids have been constantly hitting up the kitchen to ask the hero what his type is, but they might just be acting friendly to be polite. Our hero told Alice to stay out of the kitchen, which really ticked her off, but then he explained it was her birthday, and the whole crew was just trying to pull off a surprise she was making impossible. The days were flying by for the young chef, and that big birthday was getting closer every single second. With the menu set and the supplies arriving tonight, the whole village finally gets to kick back for the first time in forever. Since he's got the day off, he heads out for a bit and runs into Mr. Lebrant, who's honestly just hyped that the hero finally made it to the capital. He finishes explaining how he joined the Duchy of Atoms, and the man feels so bad for him that he promises to help out whenever things get rough. The master chef grins because his plan worked perfectly, and when he asks an old friend for a favor, the long-haired guy is totally stunned. After wrapping things up with Mr. Lebrant, our guy heads straight to the realtor's office, walks right in, and tells them he's looking for a house to rent. Once the birthday bash ended, all the work for the village and the duchy was finally finished. He had permission to crash at the mansion until spring, but he didn't want to. Since he's living solo in the capital, he definitely needs a place to stay, so he hits up the realtor who says he's already on his way over. The agent is totally shocked when a literal kid walks into his office. Sol tells him he needs a place right by the academy, but the guy isn't sure if he's even allowed to rent a room to a child. He hands the realtor that paper he got from the duchy and tells him to check it out, and the guy's jaw drops when he realizes just how big of a deal it actually is. The worker says sorry for being a jerk and asks for a sec to find him a killer deal, while our guy realizes that hitting up Albus earlier was totally worth it. A bit later, they come across this massive, super clean 2-story mansion, and the guy asks our hero what he thinks of the place. The worker says this 2-story mansion is the perfect choice since it has 4 rooms, a garden, and it's only a 20-minute walk to the academy. But the best. He's totally blown away by how massive the room is. It's a solid 25 square meters with plenty of space for a sofa, and he honestly feels like he's stepped right into a fairy tale. Renting this awesome place is 45 gold a month, or they can buy it for 9,000, and since it's so nice, our hero is totally down to take it. He's still overthinking it, but then he remembers the duchy actually vouched for this realtor, so he goes ahead and buys the house while the guy starts breaking down the contract details. The clerk is totally stunned because he thought the guy was just renting, but then the kid whips out his life savings and offers to pay the full price up front. Before long, his new place was fully decked out with furniture. He could finally call it his total dream home. He just had to show the Duke's letter to the shopkeeper one more time, too. He looks around, not totally sure if that letter was the reason, but man, this furniture looks insanely expensive. Which makes sense since he dropped a ton of cash on it. While checking out the shop, he spots a fox mask in the window that gives him major flashbacks to his old life in Japan before he was reborn. The guy's only job was to keep the house from freezing, and while he could have just used magic, he wanted it to look way more stylish than that. A bit later, he heads into the blacksmith shop and finds a massive dude busy at work, so he quickly apologizes for barging in. The bearded guy looks back at the kid and says he has no clue what a heater is, asking him to explain it again. Realizing this tech is way too dangerous for this world, he sketches a quick blueprint that totally shocks the blacksmith with its crazy, unique design. The man asks how much it'll cost to build the heater, and the kid tells him he's totally fine spending over 100 gold. The blacksmith tells them they're using Gran's ore, a special rock from the Gran's volcano that's super fireproof and actually pretty cheap. It's gonna take 3 whole days to build this new gear. They could use iron, but the heater would just burn out way too fast. Our guy tells them they have a deal. The guy asks for his name, and realizing he totally forgot to introduce himself, he says it's Garvance, but just call him Gar, and the other guy introduces himself right back. The day felt like forever, but totally zipped by, and he's pretty sure all that food for the big feast should have shown up by now. He realizes the duchy's gear is top tier just like he expected, so he's going to spend the next 2 days planning a massive surprise for the young duchess. Bright and early the next day, every single servant started grinding on the preparations. They started small with the snacks, and then whipped up the main course by the late afternoon. Everyone absolutely crushed their jobs and got... It was the night before the big party, and everyone was already fast asleep. Suddenly, 3 figures in black cloaks dashed through the estate's backyard. The maid let them right in. The guys knew they had to move fast before anyone spotted them, so they snuck into the kitchen and headed straight for the fridge where all the birthday food was stashed. A scream echoes through the whole palace, calling for the village lord, and the young man sees the cook sprinting toward him, yelling that something seriously bad just happened. He sprints into the kitchen and stops dead at the sight of the total wreck. Pots and ingredients are tossed all over the place like a bomb went off. The whole room is just buried under layers of dirt. The kid looks at one of the chefs and tells him this place is a total nightmare now, even though everything was fine yesterday, and asks what the heck happened. This guy says thieves broke into the kitchen last night, and the main character looks totally blown away. The cook realizes the door was opened from the inside, and even though they had pro guards on duty, every single one of them randomly passed out while the maid they just hired for the ball vanished. The dukeless servant is positive someone tried to sabotage the party, and when the young guy asks about the damage, he finds out all the food, dishes, and every single bottle of booze got completely wrecked. He knows he's totally screwed because the duke's daughter is about to start her big event, but they have 0 food or drinks ready, and even a regular guy like him knows this is. But then he stops panicking, pulls himself together, and tells Mr. Albus he needs eggs, milk, dishes, and alcohol delivered in under an hour. The kid tells the chefs to snap out of it since it's only 6 a.m., and the ball starts at midnight, but they're all losing their minds because they don't have any. The guy holds out his hands and, right in front of the shocked servants, every single ingredient they need just starts spawning out of thin air. He reminds them that he's handling the ingredients and just needs the Adam family staff to remember the recipes, and the chef promises they can definitely cook every single dish. He remembers he's got some emergency hunting gear stashed in his vault, and since he's totally out of options, he's just gonna have to use it to cook whatever he tells the cooks to get moving, so they call for the ingredients and start prepping the big holiday feast in perfect sync. These pro chefs show off years of experience working for this rich family as they fire up the stoves and plate the food like absolute legends. The guy watches it all go down but starts complaining that no matter how hard they try, the meat still takes forever, so now he's on a mission to find a way to make it. Our guy spots this weird black thing that looks like a baking sheet, grabs it, and shouts that this is the answer to all their problems. Suddenly, the guy yells that he's handling every single meat dish, but the chef is totally confused because there's just no way he can cook all that food alone before time runs out. He promises to show his crew a wild new way to cook at the ball today, but first, he tells them to stay focused and keep their eyes on the prize. Suddenly, Mr. Albus bursts into the kitchen to check on the guy, explaining that while he scored some eggs and milk, the booze and dishes were totally sold out everywhere. Our MC is shocked that everything sold out in a single night, but the butler reveals the Saguchi Trading Company bought it all since they're tight with the Falali family. The guy points out that the dude they found knocked out by his house is actually part of this family, and with the butler backing him up, he realizes this might be a revenge plot against the Adams. He's convinced this is all a massive setup and they're about to get jumped. But then a servant bursts into the kitchen telling the butler to get outside because the merchants just arrived. The guy tells the butler he's coming along to meet the guests, then lets the chef know the kitchen is all his. 3 people walk into the mansion and are totally shocked that the head butler himself is there to meet them, especially since they just ran out of food, plates, and drinks for Alice's big birthday party. Standing behind the butler, it all finally clicks for him. The Falale family is definitely the one behind this whole mess with the Adams family. The guy whispers his plan to Mr. Albus, who then asks if they're really from the Sagahasi Trading Company and waits for them to say yes. A second later, the butler says everything is perfect and tells the merchants they don't need their stuff, leaving the 3 guys totally stunned. A gray-haired guy turns around and tells them to find customers somewhere else, making the group get super offended as they shout that the whole estate is gonna regret this. The uninvited guests just turn around and walk right back out the front door, and while the butler tells the guy he followed his orders, the kid just says to chill because everything is about to make sense. Suddenly, the heroes hear someone rushing down the stairs, and it's a servant from the Adams house who starts screaming for the head butler. The worker tells them a big shot from the LeBrant trading house actually showed up, which totally stuns the butler as he watches baskets of food and drinks start popping up one after another. The gray-haired guy is totally shocked and asks how he saw this coming, but the kid just explains that Mr. LeBrant is a close friend he called for a favor because he knew backup would be needed. The butler asks if he knew this would happen, but the guy says he was just being extra careful, though he's mostly just annoyed he couldn't find the right drink. The guy says he's been making his own wine lately, pulls out a basket full of the stuff, and asks the butler to give it a taste. The guy thinks it's crazy since the kid is way too young for alcohol, but he still cooked it up and handed over a glass. The head servant says the wine tastes incredible and wants to buy a massive amount, so the guy jumps on the offer and locks in the deal. The merchants are just standing there totally confused, because the young guys promised that people from the mansion would come running out to meet them in just a few minutes. Out of nowhere, a masked guy stops 3 merchants and offers to buy everything they've got, and when they look at him like he's crazy, he warns them that their food is gonna rot if they don't sell right now. This masked guy offers a measly 100 gold for their whole stash, making the merchants lose their minds since the goods are actually worth 30,000. This mysterious guy says he doesn't care about the cash, but since the count already paid up, it would be a total joke if they went back with nothing. Our MC is low-key loving how mad these merchants are getting. They start haggling and try to charge 10,000 gold for everything, but he's not playing around and shuts them down. That weird masked guy just assumed they'd say yes, but they actually used Count Falale as leverage, and now those fake merchants are just shuffling toward the exit with no clue what to do next. It turns out our main guy was the one hiding behind that fox mask. He knows the big party is about to kick off, so he's gotta rush back to the kitchen. The place is buzzing. The guy bursts into the room and says sorry for being late, but everyone rushes over saying they thought Mr. Asul had totally ditched them, making him feel super awkward. The guy asks how it's going, and the chef says everything's set in the hall except the meat, so Asul promises to handle it and yanks the cloth off a bizarre-looking machine. He slaps some meat onto his homemade stove and starts complaining instantly, so when the chef asks if this is the new style he promised to show off, he just nods and says, yep. He calls this live cooking, because he whips up the food right in front of the guests, and they're all crowding around to get a front row seat to the show. Our hero slips on a mask to keep his secret identity safe. A massive crowd of birthday guests starts swarming around him. He just ignores the noise and tosses another piece of meat onto the grill. Next thing you know, he pops the cork on his homemade wine and dumps it on the meat, making a huge fire burst out. He shouts that the first steak is ready, and a massive line forms instantly as everyone starts yelling because they all want to be the first to try it. His hands are a total blur as he works his new gadget to cook up enough meat for everyone, right when Kadir shouts that the star of the party is finally here. A girl in a super fluffy dress starts heading down the stairs, and every single person in the room is totally glued to her. But then she gets distracted by the middle of the hall, where our main guy is busy frying meat on some crazy gadget she's never seen before. Right then, the oldest Adam's sister waves to her close friend, and he waves right back at her. Everyone starts complaining in their heads about the tough parts, but honestly, the whole thing was a total win. Our guy hears everyone is bugging the maids about where all this amazing food comes from, but they just say only the head butler knows the secret, and Alvis definitely isn't the type to snitch. Our hero looks at Albus, who's totally wiped out from all the prep and chaos, and realizes he's the one person he can actually trust to keep a secret. He noticed the desserts were a massive hit at the party, and they were wiped out in a total flash. The absolute best part of the night was the special cake they made just for her. She got to take the very first bite since it was her big day. And man, she totally loved it. She takes a bite of the cake and says it's amazing, literally tearing up because it tastes so good. She looks at him all blushing, whispers his name, and thanks him for giving her the most amazing birthday ever. He wishes the oldest Adam daughter a happy birthday and starts clapping, and soon every guest joins in as the big night at the duchy finally wraps up. The party's finally over and everyone's gone home, leaving the whole place dead silent. Our guy decides to just crash on a couch in the hall to finally get some rest. The gray-haired guy tells the village they did an awesome job, and they give Mr. Albus props right back before they start talking about the pay for all that cooking and organizing. The butler says the total is 300 platinum coins, and asks if he's cool with that, while the family promises to pay a massive fine if they ever leak his secret recipes. He does the math and realizes 300 platinum coins is a massive 300 million yen, which is way too much money. The head servant promises these recipes will totally change their diet, and this payment even covers all the stress that rival family caused. The butler says his boss is totally obsessed with the wine our guy made, and even though they still have 5 barrels left, he's already asking to buy 10 more. The guy gets this super sneaky look on his face, thinking it's awesome they want to buy back his wine since the deal is actually a total steal. The guy flashes a big grin and says since they're such big fans of his wine, he's totally down to sell it, and the butler tells him he's making the right move. In just one night, he became insanely rich with a steady paycheck to boot, and he's starting to realize that having ties to the duchy is a total win. The next morning, the whole village gathers around the Duke's family as the leader announces he's finally heading out, and while everyone thanks him for his help, they promise to always have his back. The lady of the Adam family said his desserts were straight up fire, so she wants him to come cook again the second he's free, and they even raved about how good his wine was. Alice says Albus told her about all the crazy stuff the guy went through before her birthday, but she's just glad he handled it, and is super thankful for the awesome party he threw for her. She hangs her head and tells him he's gotta go, but he's totally lost on why the oldest Adam daughter is so bummed out. His new friend clutches her chest, totally unable to speak, and asks him for permission to finally make her wish come true. He says he's taking off, but he's still down to bake her some treats whenever she wants, and she's obviously not gonna turn that down. The girl grabs his hand, gives it a tight squeeze, and promises that as soon as her cookies are done, she's definitely coming over to see him. Albus heads out to say goodbye and thanks the guy for his help, but when he asks what's next, the dude admits he has no clue and asks for some advice. The butler takes a second to think and says he doesn't usually do this since these lessons aren't for everyone. But since our hero is so talented, he asks if he's down to head into the maze. The butler's words totally blow the guy's mind, and suddenly he's seeing creepy visions of a cave filled with skulls and bones, making him shout, "What kind of insane maze is this?" Arturia is home to 108 massive labyrinths. These are basically giant dungeons totally packed with monsters. It's super dangerous, but you can find legendary ancient treasure inside. Plenty of. Right outside the capital sits maze number 4, and since these dungeons are ranked 1 to 10 by difficulty, it's currently got 53 floors open and ready for action. You're supposed to be 15 and have a license to enter these mazes, but Albus pulled some strings and got our hero inside anyway. He's standing right in front of this massive road that looks like it was literally cut out of a giant rock. He grabs that nasty, sticky saw off the floor, makes it his weapon, and decides it's time to see just how far he can push his luck. Every 5 floors there's a mini-boss guarding some rare loot, and our hero is hoping to take down a whole bunch of them. He locks in and taps into his power, stacking up spells to boost his strength, track enemies, hide his presence, and see everything around him at once. Once he's done with his magic, he sprints toward his goal and yells that he's pushing ahead. While navigating the maze, our hero hits his first real challenge, creepy slugs crawling right out of the stone walls. But he handles them easily using that basic stick he grabbed at the cave entrance. Our guy realizes these early enemies are total weaklings just like he expected, so he's wrecking them with a single stick and decides to keep that same energy as he pushes forward. After smashing through 4 levels, he finally reaches the 5th floor boss room and finds a massive mountain troll wielding a giant sword. The guy stares at the monster that just appeared, and it's a massive goblin wearing a crown, making him the Goblin King, who immediately starts screaming right in his face. He charges up all his energy and blasts a massive water spear straight into the guy's chest. As the dust clears from that massive hit, he knows the fight isn't over yet, so he gets back into his stance and dares the guy to come at him. As the smoke from their huge attacks finally clears, our hero sees that the goblin is totally gone, leaving nothing behind but his crown sitting on the cave rocks. Our guy is totally blown away by everything happening right now. He thinks it's super weird that things were this easy for him. He's convinced he won't run into anyone. After taking down the monster, the guy spots a chest in the corner and excitedly pops it open to find a white bag inside. He peeks inside the bag he just won and finds some mysterious seeds, so he dumps them right onto his palm. Feeling pretty let down, he shakes out the seeds and realizes this whole maze is just a storage shed for farmers, even though he's a farmer himself. After wrecking the monster on the 5th floor, he heads up to floor 6 and finds a massive, quiet field surrounded by giant mountains. He looks up and is totally shocked to see the sky while deep underground, making him realize the whole vibe must change every 5 floors. This meadow looks exactly like the home he just left, and honestly, he hasn't been able to get that girl off his mind since the moment he hit the capital. The guy lets go of his magic bee, calls her Quinn, and tells her to fly free. This bee turns to the guy like it's saying hello, and it's actually massive compared to a normal bug, so he lets it land on his shoulder and tells her he'd die. Honestly, the guy tried to leave his favorite bug behind in the village, but she totally refused to stay, so he had to bring her along for the ride. The guy says he's going even deeper and asks Quinn to join him, but she'd rather stay and fly, so he tells her to stay safe and promises to meet up with her later. The kid finally grinds his way to the 10th floor, walks into the room, and starts throwing hands with a pack of scary werewolves. Right after he clears the floor, a piece of cloth drops on him that turns out to be a cloak from the boss, so he wraps it up and spots a new chest filled with seeds. He rushes straight to the 11th floor and lands in a dark, murky swamp where the sun doesn't even shine. Things get way more dangerous on the 12th and 13th floors, proving that the deeper he goes, the tougher his enemies become. Up on the 15th floor in the boss room, this weird see-through cloud starts attacking the village, popping up right in front of him as creepy limbs start sprouting out of it. More and more of these arms keep sprouting out to grab his staff, but he dodges just in time and realizes this guy is insanely fast. He's zipping around like crazy to dodge those sharp moves, realizing this monster is basically hitting him with giant whips. Suddenly, he realizes that hitting this monster is totally useless, because his stick isn't doing any damage at all. He stares down the monster and says this is the exact thrill he wanted from the maze. But it's a total bummer these tough guys only start showing up on the 15th floor. Suddenly, these weird limbs lunged at him, swarming the guy from every single angle. Our hero locks in for a real fight and brushes off the monster's attacks like they're nothing. But he still claims he's nowhere near as strong as this beast yet. Since his punches aren't doing a thing, he flies into the air and summons a massive storm that blasts the monster with a huge bolt of light. The guy slams into the dirt after taking that massive hit. He watches the smoke from the lightning blast clear, but the monster he was aiming for is totally gone. He watches the mist clear and realizes this monster has absolutely zero defense against lightning. Our guy is super hyped to loot the chest that monster was guarding, thinking tougher enemies mean better gear. But the dude in the black cloak is totally crushed when he just finds more seeds, even though he's literally a farmer. Even while brawling with monsters on the 16th floor, the guy is still complaining that the loot in these dungeon chests is straight up garbage. Even on the 17th floor, our guy still has no clue why these seeds are here, but he's pretty sure they're totally harmless. Even while scrapping with monsters on the 18th floor, he's still thinking about how those treasure chests are a total letdown. Even while scrapping on the 17th floor, he was really hoping that taking down this tough boss would drop some epic loot, since he was dying for something cool. The 20th floor monster is actually a crazy eagle with way too many wings, and it's staring him down with total rage. As the battle kicks off, this soul is praying he doesn't get stuck with seeds again, especially since he's the one doing all the hard work to clear the maze while everyone else just laughs in his face. The hero shouts up at the flying monster that since they both control lightning, it's time to see who's actually stronger, and he kicks things off with a massive thunder rain spell. Out of nowhere, the sky turns pitch black and blasts lightning right into the eagle while it's all twisted up trying to dodge. The eagle towers over the kid, totally catching him off guard because it can actually absorb magic, and then it blasts off into the air glowing with sparks. This magic monster on the 15th floor hurls a lightsaber right at him, and the kid is so blown away he just stands there with his jaw on the floor. He scrambles to throw up a barrier, covering his face just as the monster's attack slams into his reinforced multi-layered shield. Once the spell fades, the guy switches to his other magic and asks his enemy what he thinks of him as a glowing ball of lightning sparks in his hand. Our hero throws his hands up and tells the Thunder Dragon it's time to fight, as a massive beast starts taking shape from his own magic power. The guy commands his brand new lightning dragon to attack, and it charges straight for the eagle with everything it's got. The guy called out for backup coils around the flying enemy and squeezes it so hard the monster lets out a massive scream. The monster and its enemy slam into the earth with a massive crash, shredding the beast and leaving a small crater behind. Right when the dragon finally pins the eagle, the guy summons a stone chain that wraps around the bird's whole body. He's looking down from the top of a hill and tells Tom there's absolutely no way he's getting away this time. This guy thinks he's about to land the finishing blow, but he gets totally distracted by a feather drifting down on his right side. He snatches the falling feather by the tip and checks it out, thinking it's actually pretty interesting. He remembers the Goblin King dropped a crown on floor 5, and even though monsters usually turn to dust after they're beaten, this eagle still has its feathers. He scoops up all the feathers and wing parts from the bird he just took down, and happily heads back out on his adventure. He realized that if he kills the boss too fast, all the loot vanishes, so he has to weaken him or steal the item first to keep it from disappearing just like those feathers did. Once he realized how simple it was, he decided to head back to the lower floors to wipe out every single goblin, grab their fangs and meat, and sell it all to the duchy for some. After a quick breather, he scores a pretty solid haul of loot, including sharp claws, fangs, feathers, and a ton of meat. He wipes the sweat off his face and brags about hauling in a massive 100 kilos of prime meat, realizing he's finally mastered how to hunt monsters for some serious profit. He's totally down to forgive the maze if he finds those seeds again, so since he's on the 16th floor, he decides to grab his bee and head further. Suddenly, a massive scream rings out, stopping the whole village in their tracks and catching everyone totally off guard. He knows that scream was definitely human, so he starts sprinting straight toward the noise. He sprints into the clearing and sees a knight in full armor taking on massive orcs and their tiny minions, while a cat girl lies collapsed right next to him. As he pushes past the trees, the view opens up and he realizes he's stumbled right into a clearing where exhausted adventurers are fighting monsters with every last bit of strength they have left. He spots a group of adventurers getting absolutely wrecked, and the last knight standing is on his very last legs. A second later, he looks over at a girl with cat ears who's squinting and trying to see who's standing right in front of her. He throws on the fox mask from the Merchant Guild and feels like his stealth is totally maxed out. But he still decides to use his attributes just to be safe. She's collapsed on the ground looking totally exhausted, with dark bruises under her eyes. And even though she has no clue who this guy is, she's begging him for help. He looks around and sees there are 4 of them total, but 3 are already wiped out and their leader is barely even standing. He bolts off to help everyone, because if he doesn't act now, those trapped adventurers are going to be stuck in this maze forever, and they won't be coming out alive. Our MC charges in to save a guy who can barely even stand, and now every single monster is rushing straight for him. He fires up his magic and summons lightning balls into his hands, making the guy he just saved ask who he actually is. Just as the orcs and trolls are about to pounce, the lightning they called down earlier crashes onto them, roasting the monsters right where they stand. The blonde guy who almost got wrecked is totally shocked that his hero is firing off massive spells without even reading a book, and the damage is so insane that monsters are just getting wiped out left and right. Our guy looks up and sees only one survivor from his flashy blast, a massive red ogre charging straight at him with insane speed and a terrifying roar. He drops into a fighting stance and leans forward, admitting his massive spell barely worked because this monster is way stronger than the rest, and now it's tearing into the village. The guy in the black cloak raises his hand and tells the ogre he's about to see a brand new lightning trick as a glowing trident starts forming right above his head. He screams out a spell that sounds like a sparkling spear and points his hand right at his massive enemy. That magic blast flies straight at the guy and slams right into the middle of his forehead, splitting his head clean in half. The adventurers watching him are losing their minds because they've never seen anyone master such crazy powerful magic before. A spear of pure lightning blasts right through the monster, making it faceplant and drop its massive hammer with a roar that shakes the whole area. Watching from way up high, our MC sees the ogre lasted a bit longer than the rest, but it's still a total joke compared to those beastly monsters from the Sacred Mountain. 2 random adventurers tell the kid she's safe and finally let their guard down now that the danger is totally gone. The blonde knight fought until he had nothing left, and while covering his eyes, he thanks the stranger for the save before turning back to check on his squad. The stranger rushes over to his knocked-out friends and begs them to hang in there, telling them the monsters are finally dead, and they can all head back to the surface. Our hero sees 3 teammates barely clinging to life, and a leader too beat up to save them, so he realizes he's the only one who can step in and help. The kid throws his hands up again and blasts a massive healing spell, bringing all 4 adventurers who fought the ogres right back to their senses. The blonde knight stares at his hands and realizes his wounds are totally gone, but then he looks up to see their savior already bolting away. The armored guy catches up and begs him to wait, asking for his name so he can thank the hero who just saved his whole squad from those ogres. He knows that if he doesn't say something, this guy's gonna chase him right when his friends are waking up, and the mysterious dude in the black cloak introduces himself as Ona. He ditches the crowd he just rescued and bolts straight into the thickest part of the woods. His new friend thanks him and reveals they're a squad called Brilliant Wing, promising they'll totally pay him back for his help later on. He bolts away without looking back, having no clue he just met the Brilliant Wing, the crew that would eventually become legendary C-rank adventurers. He finally hits the 10th floor to grab his pet, feeling like he's done his good deed for the day, and since it's getting super late, he decides to He calls out for his pet bee Quinn, but suddenly a massive swarm of bees that look just like her comes flying right at him. Our guy is totally blown away by the photo he's looking at, seeing that Quinn found a nearby beehive, wrecked their leader, and is now officially the new queen bee. Atul gives a shy little smile, super hyped that his pet is going to help him haul in way more honey. Fast forward 2 weeks, and our main guy is back at the duchy in my place, where he decides to build a rocking chair and totally nails it. He's super stoked that he turned the feathers from that floor 15 monster into soft pillows and even made himself a comfy chair. Our hero is totally convinced this is the ultimate way to chill, calling it straight up amazing. There are pillows on both the back and the seat of the chair. It's designed. After getting back from the maze, he realizes that multi-winged bird he crushed was actually an A-rank thunder eagle, and its feathers and meat are worth a literal fortune. Looking super chill and satisfied, the guy thinks about how it took a whole week to build this chair. But it was totally worth it since he's about to sell it for a massive profit. Before he can even grab that patent, he's got to clean up the total disaster he left behind while building his own furniture. He looks around and admits that living alone in a place like this is a total struggle, because even if he cleans everything up, the house just resets itself anyway. He claps his hands with a huge grin, totally hyped because he just decided to hire a housekeeper to do the work for him. To pull off his plan and prove he's right, he knows he needs to get a second opinion from someone who actually knows their stuff. A bit later, he's already chilling at a friend's place asking for help while Mr. LeBrant gets super hyped checking out the rocking chair he just built. This guy is vibing in a rocking chair and tells our hero he's a total genius for inventing it, saying it feels so relaxing that he absolutely needs one for his own house. His buddy gets right in his face and says he'd pay anything for a miracle like that. But LeBrant just gets back to business and tells the kid he should actually buy the housekeeper instead of hiring her, which totally blows his mind. The man tells him he needs to get a slave to handle everything, from his daily chores to all the hard work on the road. Stick closer to the text but make it sound natural. Final version. This is a massive deal for him because the village leader is super shady and keeps everyone in the dark. And since our hero knew this new world was full of slaves after being reborn from Japan, but he never actually planned on buying one himself. LeBlanc tells him this is his best bet, and since the kid is still a minor, an adult steps up to sign for him, making the guy super grateful. After talking to his friend, he realizes that if he's stuck doing chores, he won't have time to craft gear for the shop, so getting a guy to help him is way easier. Our MC and his old buddy walk up to a 3-story building that's home to the best slaver shop in the whole capital. Mr. LeBrant says he already gave the owner a heads up, so the kid just needs to explain what he's looking for to get the perfect match, and the boy thanks him for the help. Our guy finally meets the man his friend recommended, asking why he's there and laying out the strict rules for his future servant. He's got some basic rules. He needs someone who can handle the chores, and since he's planning to become a pro adventurer, he wants a partner who's actually got some real. Blushing like crazy, the guy asks for someone his age who's preferably a girl, and the owner writes it all down so he doesn't miss a thing. The new equal intends says he totally gets it now, and while he's not sure what his friend mentioned, he tells the guy to relax because they don't bother enslaving gambling losers who have zero status and a trash personality. The shop owner pulls him over to a makeshift stage and says he's about to show off every candidate that fits his list, making our guy feel pretty nervous about the whole thing. 7 girls suddenly appear before the guy, including 5 humans, a dog man, and a cat man, so he checks out their names and powers before making his final choice. The owner asks Mr. Atal which girls caught his eye and says he can have a private chat with any of them, so the guy picks out 3 slaves he wants to meet. Slave number 4 gets called up first, and after the guy introduces himself, the girl thanks him for the chance to have a private chat. Our MC says he's looking for someone to handle the chores for now, but who's also down to gear up and dive into the maze with him later. She says sorry, knowing he's probably wondering about her missing right eye and left hand, but she swears it won't stop her from becoming a total pro-adventurer. He's stoked she's so driven, but he admits he's only 10 and hopes she's okay with that, especially since he's heading to the Magic Academy this spring and is going to be totally swamped. Number 4 doesn't care how old he is, and since she's a Magic Academy grad, she's totally down to help him with his studies. He closes his eyes and realizes that even though she's lost so much, her talent is the real deal. And with her help, getting into the academy is going to be a total breeze. Next up is slave number 6, Maroon, and she immediately asks Mr. Asul where he's really from, which leaves the guy completely stunned. He realizes she thinks he's some fancy noble, so he tells her he's just a regular guy, and while he doesn't blame the dogman for the mix-up, he feels like he totally let her down. Meet slave number 7, Yomi, who promises to handle all the chores and join him on every wild adventure, so he definitely won't regret picking her up. He thinks she's a total knockout, so he admits he's just a regular commoner and asks if she's cool with that, but she surprises him by saying she'll serve. After meeting the last applicant, he's convinced she's got insane skills and a heart of gold, and he's being 100% real with her. The shop owner sneaks up and asks who he's picking, making our hero totally blush as he admits he's already made his choice. He thinks it over for a second and picks the 4th and 7th slaves because they actually seem to like him way more than the others. The shop owner finishes the deal, and just like that, our main guy is officially the new owner of both girls. The guy and his 2 buddies head back to his place, walking right through a busy street lined with all kinds of shops. As they walk, he's totally freaking out because he actually bought them, and now he has zero clue how to handle slaves or what he's even supposed to do with them. 2 girls trailing behind him suddenly rush up to check if he's okay since he's been face down on the ground for way too long. He yells that he's totally fine, but he knows there's no turning back now, and since he's officially their master, they're just gonna have to deal with it. He leads them right up to his massive 2-story mansion and tells them they've finally arrived. He tells the 2 girls to get comfortable in his modest home, and the moment the 10-year-old kid and his new maids walk into his favorite living room, he stands tall and tells everyone it's time to do their introductions all over again. Suil closes his eyes and gives a super polite bow, leaving the girls totally shook since they've never been treated with that much respect before. The slave with the missing eye and arm warns the guy to stop being so respectful, or else everyone's gonna start hating on him. The dude complains that he had no clue because he never got that fancy royal training, so he politely asks them to introduce themselves one more time. Slave number 4 tells him she doesn't even have a name, so he can call her whatever he wants. And it turns out she's a total pro at both chores and sword fighting. Slave number 7 says her name is Yomi, and while she's great at chores, she's also a total pro at spying and knows exactly how to use a dagger. The last girl just smirks and brags that she's an expert at grown-up fun, but he immediately fires back that he's ready to show her exactly what he can do tonight. The first girl jumps in totally embarrassed and yells at her friend that she's not letting her do anything weird with the master while she's around. Watching the girls bicker, he awkwardly realizes that his new roommates are actually going to get along just fine. He needs a name for the blonde girl, and after seeing her hair shine under the moon, he decides to just call her Moon. Our hero finally makes a decision and tells slave number 4 her new name is Luna, and when he asks if she's cool with it, she gets all shy and flustered. She smiles through her tears and says she's actually super happy to finally have such a beautiful name. Atul is totally shocked that Luna is crying over a new name, and he finally realizes just how much she's been through. The guy gives a little laugh and suggests they talk about their big plan over some dinner. The girls set the table for their master, and then totally daze the guy by sitting at his feet and on his lap, leaving him staring at them in a complete trance. Our MC is totally clueless and asks his slaves what's going on, so the blonde girl tells him they're just happy to finish off his massive meal, which makes sense since he's young and has so much energy. The guy just grins at how weird this world is and tells them he set the table for his maids too, since he wants to celebrate their first dinner together. The girls are so shocked their jaws literally drop, but then the brown-haired girl leaps up and says there's no way she's turning down a meal the owner already made. The two girls take a seat, but Luna is super nervous since she wasn't raised to act like this, while Yomi is totally down to be pampered by their new master. The girls take their first bites of the feast and start blushing, admitting they haven't eaten anything this good in forever, because the flavor is just making them super emotional. While they're busy eating, he finally tells them why he actually bought them, explaining that he has way too many secrets to hire regular servants, and he really needs someone to keep the place clean. He keeps talking, mentioning how he's going to hit up the maze every now and then and wants them to come along. Plus he's aiming for the Magic Academy this spring, and hopes they'll help him get in. Luda starts digging into those secrets he just mentioned, asking what they are and if girls are even allowed to know.